Orders of the day, ordre du jour.
Ordre émanant du gouvernement, projet de loi émanant du gouvernement commune, resuming debate at second reading of Bill C-19, an act to amend the Canada Election Act COVID-19 response.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Elmwood-Transcona had 6 minutes left for his speech. The honourable member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and it's a pleasure to join the House again to complete my remarks on Bill C-19. The last day we were debating this bill, I had spoken to some of the content of the legislation, both in terms of what it proposes and some of the areas for improvement that remain that I'm hopeful can be addressed at committee. I had expressed then, and I'll express again now, Madam Speaker, my desire to see this bill proceed quickly to committee. I think, well, it's important for a number of reasons. Of course, it's no secret to anybody in the House that this is a minority parliament and that things can sometimes move quickly in minority parliaments. And, you know, we could end up with an election and it's important that we be ready for that election should it come. But I also emphasize, and I want to emphasize again, the extent to which I think it really is incumbent upon all members of Parliament at this time to work to avoid an election. I mean, I think as a member of the Procedure Standing of Procedure and House Affairs, who participated in the study on what a pandemic election might look like, we heard very clearly that there's a lot of risks, and they aren't just public health risks. There are also public health risks, but there's a real risk of disenfranchising people and having Canadians who want to vote either decide that they shouldn't because it's too much of a risk to their personal health, or that they might face other barriers that are that don't have to do with an immediate risk to their personal health, but present barriers nevertheless, whether that's around, you know, transportation options to get to polling stations and other kinds of challenges that people have been facing as a result of the pandemic. So I think what's important to bear in mind here is that, you know, when all of us were elected, you know, it wasn't a pandemic that was on our mind in the election of 2019. Nobody saw this coming. But we were each elected with a responsibility to be leaders in our community, to speak for our community. And for as much as there have been disagreements on many things, and rightly so, I think that's what people would expect in Parliament, there has been and ought to continue to be an overriding sense of responsibility to work together. And there's obviously a really important leadership role for government in that, to continue to have an open posture to consult opposition parties. That was something that I frankly think they did a better job of in the early days of the pandemic, and it issued in better policy. But as the government apparently gets more interested in an election, we see some signs of that here and there in the things that they say, both about Parliament and the way that they have been behaving in Parliament, as well as some other opposition parties. But, you know, also in terms of what the Prime Minister has been saying to his national executive, and even some of the speculation about the date that was announced for the budget, which I think was later than many people expected, and happens to coincide nicely with the timing of a pre-summer election, should a Prime Minister desire it. So there's a lot of coincidences happening. I think that's the most charitable way to put it, Madam Speaker. And I think it would be a mistake for the country to be having an election at this time, as, you know, different COVID variants are popping up in different parts of the country. We just saw the experience in Newfoundland and Labrador, where an election took a much longer time to complete than anybody expected, because the nature of the pandemic changed in mid-election, and the date was pushed back many times. And it's disconcerting that we have a Prime Minister who continually refuses to say that he won't unilaterally call an election. That's a commitment that he can make. If we end up in an election, at least let it be because things actually fell apart in the House of Commons. But we have a Prime Minister who continues to retain his ability and won't pledge not to use it to just go to the Governor General and cause an election. So I think with the spirit of collaboration that this Parliament has already demonstrated, I mean, the fact that we're having a budget in April 2021 and didn't have one for the entire year of 2020, the fact that the estimates which are owed the House under the standing orders, were significantly delayed, was a sign that, Parliament has been willing to accommodate the government and recognize the extraordinary nature of the times we're in. So we have a Parliament that has shown a lot of flexibility. It hasn't always been easy. It hasn't always been a fun process getting there. It's been with its fair share of criticism for people on all sides. Fair enough. It's a Parliament. That's going to happen, Mr. Speaker. But the point is, if you look at the outcomes, we've been able to get enough good outcomes for people to make sure that financial distress and bankruptcy wasn't the overriding narrative of the pandemic for most Canadians. There are other things I think we can and should be doing, and the place to have that debate is in Parliament. And we were all elected to bring those views to the table and to do our best work to advance solutions on behalf of Canadians. I don't see a reason why that work needs to end. I would be reassured greatly if we had a Prime Minister that was willing to say as much himself and refuse to call an election unilaterally. I'll believe it when I see it. In the meantime,
unfortunately, the honourable member's time is up, but I'm sure he'll be able to add during questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable parliamentary secretary of the government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And as the Parliamentary Secretary ultimately responsible for reaching out and trying to pass this legislation through, I did want to extend my hand to anyone that has input that would like for me to take any form of action in support of passing this legislation. This is something in which I've been committed to doing for quite a while now, Madam Speaker. I agree with the member from Elmwood Transcona that in a minority situation, we need to be ready. We should be ready. Where I disagree is the member's assessment of today's Parliament. All we need to do is just take a look at the destructive force that we witnessed yesterday from the opposition parties to try to force standing committees to do certain things. My question to the member, would he also not acknowledge that Elections Canada does have that mandate to be ready, and it will be ready, and hopefully this Parliament will be able to help facilitate a healthier, safer election, whenever that might be.
The honourable member Elmwood Transcona. The honourable member for Elmwood Transcona.
Sorry, Madam Speaker. The dream of many in the House just came true. I was muted while speaking. Two things. On the first point about what happened yesterday, I mean, I think if you examine the list of Liberal private members' bills and motions, what you'll often see is a long list of mandated studies for committees. This isn't a new thing. It's been a frustration to many, but I invite the parliamentary secretary just to look at the private members' business of many of his own members, and what he'll see is that those are instructions to committees from the House. So I find it weird that he would have a principled objection to that. Perhaps that's a discussion they should have in their House Leader's office about the nature of private members' business that they think their own members ought to be putting forward, or at their caucus more appropriately. On the second point about Elections Canada being ready, I mean, we certainly heard at committee during the study on pandemic elections that Elections Canada will do everything it can to run it.
I know that there's maybe two questions, but there's only 1 minute for a response, and so I'm going to go to the member for Sarnia-Lambton. Questions and comments.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for his comments and his work on the Procedures Committee, where they studied, the recommendations from the Chief Electoral Officer. I wonder if he could comment briefly on what he thinks of the government tabling this legislation before that committee had time to actually make their recommendations.
The other member for Elmwood Transcona.
Well, I thank my colleague very much for the question. I think I probably have a little bit of a different take on that one. My own view is that it was important that the government table legislation before Christmas, because I thought that I thought that it was important that this bill proceed in a spirit of collaboration, and that MPs from different parties needed to know what was in the government's mind in terms of their initial proposal, because otherwise they would have tabled it at the last minute, and then the criticism would be that they were sitting on these changes and nobody had time to give input. I think it was better that they put their best foot forward earlier, so that there was some time over the break to think about what they were proposing. And I think it's unfortunate it took so long to get to the debate on C-19. There's a lot of reasons for that. It's not just because of the government that happened. I acknowledge that. But I think it was better to have a longer conversation with more information rather than less.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Berthier-Masquin.
The honourable member for Berthier-Masquin-Angers. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. I'd like to get his opinion on the 3-day voting period in this bill. We felt that Saturday and Sunday would have been enough. And in addition, with regard to mail-in voting, which will take place over a long period, and according to this bill, votes could be received by mail until the day after the election. This could create uncertainty, since it would defer the announcement of the results. I'd like to get my colleague's opinion on all that. Thank you.
Member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Mais je pense que le plus gros...
I think that the biggest risk when it comes to uncertainty on the results of the election, well, it's really politicians saying that people should have uncertainties. After all, there are many countries in the world where the final result of the vote is not known until a week or two later, and it's not the end of the world. So I think that as long as we take the necessary measures to ensure that elections are secure while the vote is being counted, I think it's okay to have a little more time after the day of the vote. But that's something that should be debated in more detail at committee. And that's why I want to see this legislation move forward as quickly as possible to committee.
And comments, the honourable member for North Island Powell River.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I thank the member for his informative speech. My question to the member is, what concerns does he have around this legislation being passed in a timely manner so that if the Liberals do call an early election, it's a fair one?
Honourable member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Sure. I mean, I think one of the things that Canadians need to know about this bill is that there's a clause that says its provisions won't come into effect until 90 days after the bill passes through Parliament, which includes the other place, not just the House of Commons. And so, you know, if anybody is thinking about having an election before summer, it may well be too late already to have an election under these rules. I do think that the proposed legislation, and particularly after some improvement in a committee, will make for a much better election, both from the point of view of public health, but also from the point of view of ensuring that everybody who wants to cast a ballot has their voice heard, and that their vote counts, and that they get it in the ballot box. So I think it's really important these modifications are made in case we have an election. It's already probably too late for an election that would occur before the summer. And I'd like to see the Prime Minister commit to not calling an election before the summer.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thanks to my honourable colleague from Elmwood-Transcona, who's a real warrior on interesting issues such as the convention for moving from a House to an election. But I really want to ask him about one of the missing pieces that I was surprised was missing, which is the physicality and the COVID risk of collecting the signatures. We usually have to, our volunteers go out, we have to have 100 signatures on paper. I know from provincial colleagues that this was a problem in pandemic, and I just asked for his comments.
The honourable member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Thank you. I do think this is a really critical issue. It's something that I think the committee really should be taking up on, as one of its priorities for the legislation. And what I'd say, and I mean, people in the House will know I'm not a wallflower when it comes to criticizing the government. But if you look back to the C-76 in the last Parliament, there was a very combative way to change the Elections Act. The approach so far seems to be different. I think that's important, and I think that creates the space for the committee to do good work on this and other issues in order to get some changes we can all agree on and proceed on that basis. So I remain optimistic in respect to this legislation that we should be able to find a path forward and get good rules in place to protect both public health and democracy in the case that we do have an election. Best option, let's not have an election right now. It's not a good time.
Comments? The honourable member for Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan. A brief question, please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The member spoke. I think it's very clear that the government desperately wants a pandemic election because they're focused on their own political interests. And part of that argument is they're making is about Parliament not working. What we've seen is the opposition work very collaboratively to get key spending bills passed, especially in the early phase of the pandemic. But also we do see cases where opposition parties are working together to get things done that the government doesn't like. We saw with the creation of the Canada-China Committee, the Uyghur genocide. We have a motion at Foreign Affairs on COVAX that the government is filibustering. Does the member have a comment on the fact that if anyone is hurting the work of Parliament, it's often been the government that's trying to delay things that opposition parties are actually working together on?
I do want to remind members when someone has the floor, it's a bit rude to be going back.
Well, thank you for the question. And I mean, you know, as a member of the Procedure and House Affairs Committee, which currently is undergoing a filibuster of Liberal members who, you know, don't want to have a vote on a particular motion that has to do with the We Charity scandal. I mean, I'm certainly attuned to the ways in which the government is also causing dysfunction when it suits its political purposes. And it's why I just reiterate again, I think as MPs, we all have a responsibility here to try and rise above that kind of stuff and do our job and keep the focus on people. And that includes trying to avoid an election right now because there are serious risks to both public health and to our democracy. We don't need a political crisis on top of an economic and a public health crisis at the same time. And the best way to avoid that is not to have an election. And we need to think differently about the way we might have approached our jobs in the last Parliament and in the early days of this one.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Richmond Hill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to let you know that I'll be splitting my time with the member from Kings Hunt. Madam Speaker, I'm happy to join the House today to discuss Bill C-19, an act to amend the Canada Election Act COVID-19 response tabled last December. This is an important piece of legislation that will create more accessible voting options for all Canadians. More precisely, I will outline the ways in which this bill seeks to temporarily enhance mail-in voting for electors, should a general election be required during the pandemic. Madam Speaker, we have seen during this pandemic how important accessibility is, and we've even taken more accessible measures in this House through Zoom video conferencing and voting by app. Mail-in voting is a safe and accessible option for all Canadians. According to the research conducted by Election Canada, it is expected that up to 5 million electors will choose to vote by mail during an election delivered in the context of the pandemic. In comparison, approximately about 50,000 electors opted for this option during 2019 election. This is only 1% of the turnout that can be expected during a pandemic. As many honourable members know, jurisdictions inside and outside of Canada that have had election during a pandemic have witnessed a steep increase in the use of mail-in ballots. Many electorals, particularly those that are most vulnerable, choose to vote in this manner because it's safe and it's secured. The existing federal mail-in vote system is no different, and nothing in Bill C-19 would change that. At the same time, we need to be prepared for an expected surge in mail-in ballots, which is why Bill C-19 includes new mail-in vote measures. These new mail-in vote measures will strengthen the current mail-in vote system by facilitating the use of this voting method for all Canadians, thereby ensuring the health and safety of electors who feel more comfortable voting from home. In my riding of Richmond Hill, we have a large population of seniors who would largely benefit from an expansion of mail-in voting measures. Madam Speaker, I facilitated a community council in Richmond Hill that's specifically targeted to advocating for seniors. One of the major concerns I have constantly heard regards engagement. The pandemic has isolated our seniors from their communities, their social circles, and from the government. Expanding mail-in balloting and making the process simple will ensure that our seniors do not become more disenfranchised. Bill C-19 would temporarily establish 4 new mail-in vote measures. First, electors will be able to register online. Second, mail-in ballot boxes will be installed at polling stations. Third, electors will be able to use identification numbers in lieu of copy of their ID when registering. And fourth, electors will have the option to still vote in person even after registering for mail-in voting. The first measure will enable electors to apply online to register to vote by mail, thereby allowing them to avoid in-person voting together. This will limit in-person contact and will be a critical option for those electors with significant health concern. In addition, while online registration provides electors with the opportunity to participate in the election process from their home, individuals without access to the internet will still be able to register to vote by mail. Madam Speaker, for those in my riding who are not comfortable registering online, the option to register by mail still will be available for them. In this way, we are not limiting options for electors, but expanding them with one more option to register for mail-in voting. Bill C-19 would also see mail reception boxes installed at all polling stations. This measure recognizes that some electors who register to vote by mail may be too busy to find the time to return their ballot kit by mail. And so, to support limited in-person contact, we are providing electors with a secure and convenient means to deposit their ballots. The third measure provides electors with the opportunity to use an identification number instead of their ID when establishing proof of identity and residence when registering to vote by mail. This measure makes it easier for electors to register to vote by mail-in ballot, especially to our most vulnerable who face significant health risk. I want to make note that this, like all elements of Bill C-19, is a temporary measure in which electors must consent to the use of this data when registering with an identification number. To protect against voter fraud, Election Canada is required to hold relevant data on the electors. Lastly, the Bill C-19 electors would still have the option to vote in person even if they have already registered to vote by mail. At the same time, electors who choose to do so will have to return their mail-in ballot kit that was received after registration or sign a declaration stating that they have not already voted via mail-in ballot. We want to help ensure the integrity of the vote this way. As it stands, Canada's federal voting system is robust, with measures already in place to safeguard electoral integrity against fraud. Election Canada has a long history of experience administrating the mail-in voting system with extensive integrity measures and safeguards. There is no evidence to suggest that current system enables widespread voter fraud or poses concerns to ballot security. Finally, it is responsible to assume that an expected increase in mail-in voting may trigger the need for Chief Electoral Officer to adapt provisions of the Canada Election Act during the pandemic. As such, the proposed increase, Section 17 authorities would allow the CEO to respond accordingly should new challenges or circumstances arise. Taken together, these measures seek to address our unprecedented times by providing extensive opportunities to Canadians to be able to vote. We are building on a mail-in voting system that is expected to see a surge in use. I would encourage the honourable members to support this legislation and send it to the committee, as the increase in mail-in voting will be an unprecedented surge that we need to proactively address. The sooner it goes to the committee, the sooner we'll be able to do a substantive review of that and send it to the other house for approval, so we can implement these measures before any election might be called during the pandemic. The measures outlined in this legislation also aims to do so with the strength and efficiency, and will support electorals to voting from the comfort of their home. These measures are imperative in ensuring that we are not putting vulnerable Canadians at risk, while also limiting large election crowds in public spaces like schools, community centers, and religious spaces where voting booths are usually located. In closing, Madam Speaker, in such challenging times, Bill C-19 provides ways to ensure citizens can safely and widely participate in the electoral process. I thank all the members, and I urge them to support this bill and send it to the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in this manner, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for King Hants.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his remarks here today. I just want to go back to a point that was raised just before him from the member from Elmwood and Transcona. He talked about the Act being implemented 90 days after receiving royal assent, but there is a provision that allows the Chief Electoral Officer to do so sooner on their discretion through the Canada Gazette. But it takes me to my point, and my question is, this bill that is coming forward is obviously coming because of the advice and some of the recommendations that the Chief Electoral Officer is asking Parliament to be able to make some changes if an election were to happen. How important does the member opposite think that it is that Parliament, that we do make sure that these measures that the CEO is asking for are implemented in due course?
The honourable member for Richmond Hill.
Thank you. Through your chair, Madam Speaker, to my colleagues. I'm not a member of opposition, but it is important for us to make sure that we look at the bill in a substantive way. And I believe the Election Canada is already having received input and having done extensive consultation. They're well on their way. I'm making sure that they put procedures in place to make sure that we have a open, democratic, and safe election. It needs to be. So there is a legislative piece that we are following, but there's also a preparation piece that, with the view of the committee recommendations and Election Canada in itself doing a lot of consultation, they're in a position to be able to kind of parallel the process and make sure that if an election is called during a pandemic, we are in a position to be able to hold a democratic and safe election.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I am proud to be a member of the Procedures and House Affairs Committee that actually tabled a report just a month ago, or a month and a half ago, regarding elections here in Canada during the pandemic. And I was very concerned when I saw this piece of legislation come out prior to the report, where we provided excellent information, including not having an election during a pandemic. Yet, we know that in the GTA, there are already Liberal campaign offices set up. Can I ask this Member of Parliament his thoughts on when he thinks this election will be called by his government?
The honourable member for Richmond Hill.
I thank the member opposite for asking that question to you, Madam Chair. The most important thing is our government's focus has remained from the beginning on making sure that we are keeping Canadians safe and we are making sure that they have the supports that they need. Our focus remains to be making sure that we do that. As the budget, as we're looking forward to the budget on April 19, our focus remains on the Canadians, their safety, and making sure that the support that they need. On the other hand, we all have to be ready for election. And this is the nature of a minority parliament. And we're doing our part. And as a government, we're making sure that our focus remains on people, on Canadians, on their safety, and making sure that they have the support. As elected members in a minority parliament, our job is to be ready. The government is ready, and we have to be ready. So being ready is good.
The
honourable member for Saint-Jean. Thank you, Madam Speaker. At the committee, we heard a number of recommendations made. For example, to extend voting over a number of days and to have votes on the weekend so that we have more staff, especially with youth, because elders may not want to, seniors may not want to participate in elections. So how about having elections on a weekend rather than on a Monday, for example?
Has just under a minute to respond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To you, again, I want to thank the member opposite for asking the question. Look, all the work that was done in the committee is not lost. Okay, the sooner we get this bill to the committee, we can take all of those into account. And number two is the reason we are extending it, and we are proposing to extend it over 3 days, is about the safety, is about making sure that the Canadians have the opportunity to be able to effectively participate in a democratic process while keeping him safe. And that's all it is. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
And before I continue, I just want to remind members that whether someone is participating virtually or in the House, when they have the floor, they should have the respect of their other colleagues in the House, or to make sure that there is no other debate going on in the House. If members wish to debate the issue at hand, even if it's not their turn, I would ask them to wait and stand and try to be recognized, or if they want to have side conversations, that they step out of the chamber to do that, out of respect for all members of Parliament. Resuming debate, reprise de débat, l'honorable secrétaire.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Veterans and the Associate Defence Minister.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm very pleased to rise to speak to Bill C-19, as it is an important initiative that will allow Elections Canada to safely administer an election should one be held in the context of the current pandemic. As we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic and virus has had a global impact on almost every aspect of our lives. Canadians from coast to coast have made and continue to make significant sacrifices to protect each other. We have had to rethink things that we took once for granted. Things as simple as a family dinner. Around the world, events have had to be cancelled or postponed. We all regret this, but these measures are essential to limit the spread of the virus and save lives. But we also need to ensure the health of our democratic institutions, and we must make sure that a general election, should it take place during the pandemic, can be conducted safely for voters, for volunteers, and of course for election officials. A number of countries have held general elections as planned despite the pandemic, and some chose instead to postpone them. Of those that did, several countries implemented strict public health measures, such as mask requirements, physical distancing, and the distribution of hand sanitizer and disposable gloves to voters. Take South Korea, for example, which was one of the first countries to implement elections during the pandemic. It allows us to see that it was possible to administer a safe election during the pandemic, as there were no new cases linked to the election. But let us not bury our heads in the sand. Running an election during a pandemic such as the one we are currently experiencing would not be without challenges. In Canada, we are fortunate to have a world-class election administration agency. For over 100 years, Elections Canada has done an outstanding job of providing Canadians with the best possible service in choosing those who will have the honour of representing them in this House. I am confident that, if necessary, the agency would conduct a safe election despite the pandemic. That being said, we have an opportunity to give Elections Canada additional tools to better ensure the safety and health of voters and election workers. Madam Speaker, Bill C-19, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act, will do just that. On a temporary basis and applicable only during this pandemic, it will allow Canadians to exercise their right to vote safely whilst maintaining the integrity of the electoral system. First, we must think of those most vulnerable residing in the many long-term care facilities across the country who have been particularly affected by COVID-19. The bill therefore provides for a period of 13 days prior to the start of voting, during which returning officers can work with officials of these facilities to ensure that those residing there can vote safely. Second, the bill would strengthen the Chief Electoral Officer's power to adapt. The objective is to enable the CEO to respond effectively to the unpredictable circumstances created by the pandemic. Currently, Section 17 of the Canada Elections Act allows the Chief Electoral Officer to adapt the provisions of the Act to allow voters to cast their ballots or to allow the counting of votes. The proposed measure would temporarily expand Section 17 by allowing the Chief Electoral Officer to adapt the provisions of the Act to ensure the health and safety of voters and election workers. Third, in order to encourage the practice of physical distancing and to avoid long lines at polling stations, Bill C-19 would create a 3-day voting period on Saturday, Sunday and Monday. These 2 weekend days would add a total of 16 hours of voting to the 12 hours on Monday and allow voters to choose the time that is most convenient for them. In addition to ensuring the safety of our electors, this measure is intended to maximize voting opportunities for all electors. Finally, given the success of absentee ballots here and elsewhere, this bill would direct the CEO to facilitate access to this method of voting in a number of ways. Elections Canada estimates that up to 5 million electors could choose to vote by mail if the election were to place during the pandemic. To meet this demand, this bill would provide for the installation of secure boxes to receive ballots at the returning office and all polling stations, allow for the receipt of online absentee ballot applications, and permit identification numbers to be accepted as proof of identity for these applications.
De plus,
in addition, it would allow voters who have applied for an absentee ballot to change their minds and still choose to vote in person. This measure comes with certain conditions to protect the integrity of the electoral system. In conclusion, Madam Speaker, this bill will give Elections Canada useful tools to administer an election safely during the pandemic. I invite my honourable colleagues to join me in supporting this bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions et commentaires?
Questions and
Park Fort, Saskatchewan.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I find it interesting that we have Liberal members speaking to this bill, because from what I understand, the minister responsible for this legislation has actually sent a letter to the Conservatives saying, we really want this debate to collapse in only an hour. And, you know, we feel that it's legitimate to have some debate on this issue in Parliament. But there seems to be a dissonance between what the minister responsible and what individual Liberal members are doing, because we have most of the time for debate today being taken up by Liberal members giving speeches. So how does the member explain his decision to give a speech today at the same time as his government is telling everybody else not to speak because they want this to collapse?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for his question.
Evident that the Liberal members do not want this debate to collapse. We're here to have discussions and the necessary debate that is required and to move this legislation as quickly as possible, of course, to committee. The reason is clear, that we want to make sure that we have a framework in place in the possibility of an election. This government does not want an election, but as you know, and everybody in the House knows, and all Canadians knows, we are faced with a minority government. And if that is what happens, then we will deal with it, but we'll have the framework to make it happen. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. The Liberal members keep on saying that they don't want to call an election in the middle of a pandemic. And of course, the Prime Minister actually has that right. He actually can not call an election if he doesn't want to do so. And the truth of the matter is, in the middle of a pandemic, we shouldn't be having an election. So will the members support this, that no election would be called unless if there is a crisis in a situation whereby, for example, a budget does not pass? Only on a confidence vote would there be an election called if the confidence vote fails.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for her important question. And she knows well that this government, since March 13th of last year, has been fully focused on this pandemic, on this crisis at hand. We have focused on individuals, we have focused on families, we have focused on the business community, we have focused on Canadians, all Canadians. As you know, we brought the Serve for Individual Canadian, we brought the wage subsidy to support businesses, but also individuals working in those businesses. We brought the business account, we've brought the Canada recovery benefit. We've supported various industries which are struggling in this pandemic more so than others. This has been our focus, and we will continue to support Canadians as we have done since we have formed government. Thank you.
We have time for a brief question. The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Under the current law, mail-in ballots need to be received by Election Day, but this legislation says that they could be received later. So first of all, does the member believe that this might create some uncertainty in terms of the results? And is this perhaps a lack of trust in Canada Post? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and of course I want to thank my colleague for her question. Well, listen, we need to have a structure in place. You know, the fact that people can vote over a 3-day period, you know, is a good thing. We learned a lot from this pandemic. We saw where there were problems and where we can improve things. Now, maybe the 3-day voting period will be something we can use in the future, and we're confident, you know, Elections Canada says that most of the mail-in ballots will be received by Election Day. But we want to allow all voters to express themselves and ensure that Canadians can vote and maximize all opportunities to vote. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure to speak to Bill C-19, the Election in a Pandemic Bill. And what I would say at the outset is that Canadians do not want an election in a pandemic. The only people that want an election in a pandemic is the Liberals, because they're putting their partisan interests over the health and safety of Canadians. And, you know, Madam Speaker, the polls reflect what I'm saying. The polls on whether Canadians want an election and when they want that election, 47% of Canadians want it in the fall of 2023 as it's scheduled to be. 10% would want it in 2022. 70% of Liberal supporters want it in 2023, Madam Speaker. And so, you know, the Prime Minister needs to listen to Canadians. We've seen the disastrous things that have happened in the country. When BC and Saskatchewan had their elections, there were huge spikes in COVID thereafter. factor. And I know some people believe that's only related to the Thanksgiving weekend, but the timing with the elections was very, very suspicious as well. We see what happened in Newfoundland and the fact that the COVID situation can change. And we've seen that across the country, that regions can have spikes and all of a sudden, they're in a difficult situation. And so really, I think it's incumbent upon us as leaders to listen to Canadians and to put their health and well-being first. And so first and foremost, I would say we need to do everything we can to not have an election in the middle of a pandemic. It's ridiculous to think that people can't travel, but we think we can have a federal election, that we would have areas that are on lockdown, but we think it's okay to have a federal election. So I can't make that point too strongly in terms of making sure that we don't, as leaders in this country, put people in jeopardy. Now, in terms of the proposed changes, I thought I would speak to those one at a time. The first change I want to talk about is extending the number of days of voting to have a Saturday, Sunday, and Monday vote. The whole purpose of this legislation is to try to protect the workers, the people that are working the election, and the voters. And so I think every measure that we can put in place that will allow more time and more spacing of people is going to be very helpful. I do think that some of the discussion that happened about these weekend days, there was some concern whether there would be bus transportation on those days in some areas. But I think the fact that they've retained the traditional Monday is going to address that concern. There were some concerns expressed about the fact that churches are operating, some on Saturday and some on Sunday, and that this might have an impact on polling locations. So I think it would be incumbent on the government to consider changing the time that the voting stations are open on the Saturday and a Sunday in order to not eliminate some of the polling locations that are used that usually have quite a bit of space and would be conducive to COVID protocols and that kind of separation. The next change is granting additional powers to the Chief Electoral Officer to do a number of things, to extend vote times up to midnight, to increase the number of election officers at a polling station, to determine what is satisfactory proof of identity and residence, to adjust the timeline of election tasks other than polling days, and to do whatever is needed to address health and safety. Well, I understand that we need some flexibility because the COVID situation is dynamic. But what I would say is that there needs to be some kind of oversight in order that we protect what is a tried and true democratic process. Canadians have confidence in our process. I think having the oversight potentially of a member, a representative from each party that is represented here in the House, for example, might be a good way to get a balance between giving the electoral officer the ability to be flexible to react to COVID situations and making sure that any changes that are put in place are felt to be fair by all. In terms of the voting hours being extended to midnight, the only concern I have there is that in some ridings like my own, many of the people that are working the polling stations are seniors. And so if they had to be up multiple nights till midnight, that might be taxing on them, especially in this difficult period. So that's something to think about. The changes will go into effect 90 days after royal assent, but the Chief Electoral Officer could accelerate that. And in speaking to some of the returning officers across the country, they've already been trained on these changes even before we've talked about it here in Parliament, which I don't think is acceptable. But certainly a conversation should be held with the Chief Electoral Officer as to how much time they need in order to make sure that they would be prepared. And that is, I think, something that the committee could consider when it comes back there. The writ period sort of being slightly longer due to the additional days, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, because with all of the mail-in ballots that we expect to see, maybe an increase from the current 50,000 to 5 or even 10 million mail-in ballots, we need to make sure there's enough time to get those ballots that for people to request them, for example, and for them to receive their ballots and mail them back. And we know at Christmas time with the volumes that we see that sometimes there are delays with Canada Post, and so that is a consideration. And I would strongly recommend that we go to the longer electoral writ period. I certainly think that is the testimony of the Chief Electoral Officer and many of the stakeholders that were heard at the PROC committee. The location of polls can be changed, and as long as that's published on the Chief Electoral webpage, we just need to be very careful with that one to make sure that people don't get confused about where they need to go to vote. The reception boxes that will be installed at each of the polling stations to receive mail-in ballots. This is a very good idea. This is going to make sure that people who have left it too late or are concerned that maybe their ballot won't arrive with Canada Post because of the volume, they can go to the nearby polling station and deposit those mail-in ballots. This is something that was tried in the BC election and was very, very successful. So I do really think that's a great idea. In terms of allowing mail-in ballots, if the Monday is a holiday, to be counted after the election, I would say that we have got a tried and true election process. Canadians have confidence in it. We don't have the same issues that they have in other places. And so we have to be very careful not to make any changes that aren't needed in order to protect people from the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think with the measures that we talked about, like the ballot boxes that are at the different polling stations for late mail-in ballots and things like that, I think that certainly this is really not something that is needed. Allowing an electronic application for the mail-in ballot, I think that is something that people will want. The only thing that I think needs to be considered is the fact that many people, some of whom are seniors, won't necessarily have a printer that they can photocopy their ID and everything on when they have to mail back their package. So some consideration of how that is going to be addressed from a capacity point of view would be good as well. Long-term care institutions. We heard testimony. I was subbing in that day on PROC, and they were looking for the minimum amount of time, the minimum amount of interaction to minimize the risk from COVID. And so the legislation says that there'll be 13 days for voting in long-term care, but not to exceed 28 hours. That's really much longer than what the long-term care folks wanted. They had envisioned, people from Elections Canada that would come in and potentially administer the vote from room to room to room for those that did not choose a mail-in ballot. In addition, some of the folks that I've spoken to have said that should there be an election in a pandemic, they would want to make sure that the people working the election could have priority access to be vaccinated if they so choose before the actual voting days. So that is another consideration. Rapid tests was another topic, and the use of rapid tests to make sure that they had confidence that those going into the long-term care facilities didn't add risk. That would be something to consider as well. And so in terms of things that I think maybe were not considered in this legislation that should be fixed or added, the sunset clause is in it's in the summary, but it's not in the bill. And so, there should be some statement in there that says whether we want these changes to be permanent or whether we want these changes to, fade after the pandemic is over, or some kind of provision like that. The other thing, I appreciated the signature collection point that the member from Saanich Gulf Island made, that, candidates are required to have these 100 signatures, and in a pandemic, that is probably not the best idea, going to be more difficult certainly to do. And I think we should be looking at all of the kind of procedures related to candidates. Scrutineering would be another one. It's not clear in the legislation how we're going to do that, but one of the things that gives people confidence in the process is that there there are scrutineers. And so if they have to stand 6 feet away from people, logistically, will they be able to really see the ballots, and how will we address that? And if we're doing all of these mail-in ballots, I understand that there was an error in the legislation and that the English version says something different than the French version, and that the French version was clarified by the speaker to be correct, that the local returning office is going to be where those mail-in ballots go to. So depending on the volume there, how many people will be needed to scrutineer? Those details are not in the legislation, and so certainly that is a consideration in order to maintain the high confidence that Canadians have. I would say as well that we want to make sure that the mechanism to prevent double voting is in place. And I think with the local returning offices being involved, that they will then have a very easy way to take the voters list, and once people have requested a mail-in ballot, to make sure that unless the mail-in ballot is returned, that they wouldn't be able to vote at the polling stations as well, and that sort of thing. I think that would be very, very important. The main thing about this bill, I would say, is that we want to protect the workers, we want to protect the voters, and we want to do that in a way that continues to uphold the confidence that Canadians have in the electoral process in Canada. I'm a little disappointed that the Liberals introduced this legislation without waiting for the report from the PROC committee, because I think they heard testimony from a lot of different kinds of people, from the disabled and from our First Nations people, and a lot of the specific considerations that would be needed to fine-tune this process and make sure that it was suitable for every Canadian to be able to have equal access to vote, and to make sure that the process is well understood. One of the considerations when it comes to implementing a change is that it has to be well understood, or there'll be confusion and people may not want to vote. Madam Speaker, I see you signaling. How is my time?
You have 7.5 minutes left, but there's only about another minute and a half at the most, and then you'll be able to carry over your time.
All right, very good. Well, then let me just summarize again that I think that Canadians don't want an election in a pandemic. They've been clear about that. And we need to do everything that we can. When I see committees filibustering, slowing down the work that the committees are trying to do, and some of the antics that are going on, I think that's not helpful. I think we need to work together as Parliament and, get through this pandemic. That has to be the priority. And I think that would behoove us. The additional thing that I wanted to talk about was the changes for health and wellness. I don't think that we've got enough definition around that. These are additional powers, again, with the electoral officer. So I do think that will need some consideration when this comes back to committee. And I think that it's worth hearing from some of the stakeholders again to better define things like the long-term care facilities and how we're going to do that, especially if there are those that are on lockdown. What are we going to do in that scenario? So certainly there is more conversation to be held, and I see my time is up. And so, Madam Speaker, thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, the honourable member will have just a little over 6 minutes the next time this matter is before the House to continue her speech. Statements by members, déclaration des députés. The honourable member for St. John Ross say. The honourable member for St. John Ross.
Madam Speaker, last week I had the privilege of being part of an historic announcement for my riding of St. John Ross. Our government introduced an investment of $56 million for the responsible development of small modular reactor technology, including an investment in Moltex Energy. Our government is committed to net zero emissions by 2050, and this cannot happen without our deep commitment to developing SMR technology across the country. These projects will help us to continue to build a highly skilled workforce at home in New Brunswick, as well as continue to advance new foundational technology. This is an investment not only for our future, but for the future of our kids and grandkids who will ultimately face the consequences of something very real, climate change. I'm proud to be part of a government that recognizes science and invests in it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Dauphin Swan River, Nipawin.
Madam Speaker, mankind has yet to step foot on planet Mars. But thanks to the innovation and work spearheaded by Manitoba's Mark HoC, my constituency is leading the way. Based in the rural community of Minnedosa, Manitoba, Canadian Photonic Labs has been working with NASA on their Mars exploration program. Their high-speed imaging technology has been extensively used for research and development along with testing the mission's critical events. As a result, the Perseverance rover successfully landed on the Red Planet earlier this year. The successful mission would not have been possible without the technology developed by the Canadian Photonic Labs. Congratulations to Mark HoC and to everyone else who worked tirelessly on this Canadian success story. Your contributions to science and technology are out of this world. Mission accomplished.
The honourable member for Parkdale High Park.
Madam Speaker, the start of spring signals the start of the new year for the Ismaili community. As an Ismaili Canadian serving in the House of Commons, I take great pride in wishing fellow Ismailis across the country and indeed around the world, Navroz Mubarak. With the start of the new year, we obviously reflect on the one that has just passed. COVID-19 has presented incredible challenges, not just for Ismailis, but for all Canadians. But what I've been most impressed by, Madam Speaker, is the resilience of the Jamaat. The Ismaili community stepped up in its commitment to serving others by providing essential medical services, working on the front lines, and most importantly, looking after Canada's seniors. This has been a shining example of the model of seva, or volunteerism, that His Highness the Aga Khan teaches about. The arrival of a new year always brings a sense of hope and optimism, never more so than this year, as vaccines roll out and work collectively to build back from COVID-19. To all Ismailis celebrating this week, I wish you Navroz Mubarak. May the new year bring you and your family health, happiness, and prosperity. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Victoria.
Madam Speaker, through all the immense hardships of this year, I've been heartened to see the community of Victoria pulling together to support each other. The opioid crisis and toxic drug supply have been devastating. This is why the North Park community came together with a free drug testing site. The Vancouver Island Drug Checking Project operates anonymous testing for anyone who needs it. Many local businesses have been struggling, but through the Building Back Victoria initiative, Broad Street businesses came together and found a way to thrive by creating a pedestrian zone with outdoor seating where people can gather safely, with hopes it can become a permanent public space. And last week, I am proud to share that the Victoria Admirals U13 team were named champions of the Good Deeds Cup, awarded to the Canadian youth hockey team that does the most to give back to their community. The $100,000 prize will go to the Children's Health Foundation of Vancouver Island. Well done, Admirals. The pandemic isn't over. We still have difficult months ahead, but these community members show us that we can get through this together.
L'honorable député de Pontiac.
The honourable member for Pontiac. Madam Speaker, what an incredible announcement made by our government with Quebec recently. With a remarkable, massive federal and provincial investment of $826 million, we will have the necessary means to achieve our ambitious goal of giving access to high-speed internet to all Quebecers by fall 2022. This operation will enable my region of Outaouais to receive $147.4 million to connect 29,000 homes in Pontiac, the Gatineau Valley, the Gatineau Hills, La Petite Nation, and Gatineau. These investments are unprecedented, and they show that regional internet is a priority for me as an MP for Quebec and Canada, and for all Quebecers and Canadians.
Will receive more funds than any other region in Quebec, connecting more homes and businesses than any other in Quebec. $147 million to connect 29,000 homes by September 2022.
The honourable member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Madam Speaker, I am deeply disturbed by the recent Atlantis mass shootings that took 8 lives, of which 6 were Asian women. Denying the racial component of this heinous crime undermines the reality of anti-Asian bigotry. With COVID-19 lockdowns, Vancouver alone has seen a 717% increase of anti-Asian hate crimes. Many are unreported for fear of reprisal. But COVID-19 has only exposed the undercurrents of pre-existing prejudice. From the building of the railroad to head taxes, anti-Asian racism has historical roots in Canada. And members of the Chinese and Korean Canadian communities in BC have shared with me their frustrations of perpetrators getting away with racist attacks while they privately deal with anxiety and trauma. I can personally testify that it can take years to undo the feelings of being an outsider and the turmoil caused by racism. So today, I stand in solidarity with all who are struggling because of racism, and I'm committed to promoting awareness and helping victims find their justice. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Madawaska.
The honourable member for Madawaska-Restigouche.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to recognize the exceptional work of women's shelters in our riding that offer support and comfort to the people victims of domestic violence. We have amazing teams of advocates here and across Canada who are always available and ready to help these victims. Hats off to l'Escale, Madavik, and Maison Notre-Dame for their amazing contribution to help fight domestic violence. The constant and immediate needs of organizations that provide gender-based services have been demonstrated, especially throughout this pandemic. Our government has invested $100 million across the country to support these services, and my riding of Madawaska-Restigouche alone, that represents over 200, and for my Madawaska-Restigouche alone, I mean, that represents over $252,000. Again, to l'Escale, Medavik, and Maison Notre-Dame, their board of directors, employees, and volunteers, thank you for offering comfort and security to these families in need of help. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
L'honorable député de Acadie-Bathurst.
The honourable member for Acadie-Bathurst.
To celebrate the life and acknowledge the passing of Elder Gilbert Sewell, a highly respected member of Papineau First Nation. Elder Sewell is an excellent example of someone who dedicated their life to the pursuit and sharing of knowledge. Il était un historien, conteur et un guide traditionnel.
He was a historian, storyteller, and what he really loved was to pass on his knowledge to future generations.
From his effort to organize Mi'kmaq cultural events at local school, to having audiences with British royalties, or to being featured on many well-known TV programs. His passion was recognized with several awards, including the New Brunswick Human Rights Award, the Canadian Merit Award, and the Queen's Jubilee Medal. It is no exaggeration to say that Elder Sewell teaching will help ensure that Mi'kmaq traditional knowledge and language will live on for generations to come. To his family and loved one, thank you for sharing this great man with us, and please know our thoughts are with you during this difficult time. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Madam Speaker, businesses have been hit hard, in particular fitness and martial arts, including 2 entrepreneurs in Kelowna Lake Country. Michelle, Spinco Indoor Cycling Studios founder, says the pandemic has been very tough on our business, as we've been completely closed for the better part of a year, having taken on a lot of debt we did not anticipate. Our franchisees are local female entrepreneurs, and in some cases are not eligible for support programs. Jordan owns Pacific Top Team Martial Arts Academy. At a great loss, he had to close one of his 4 locations because it was open just prior to the pandemic, making it not applicable for government programs. He describes this situation and many others in his industry as suffering. Health orders are provincial jurisdiction. However, there's been a lack of federal leadership on every aspect of the pandemic for a year now. It was disappointing the Liberals voted down a Conservative motion this week calling on the government to introduce a data-driven COVID reopening plan to gradually, safely, and permanently lift restrictions as other countries have.
The honourable member for York Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Tomorrow evening marks the beginning of Passover. In my riding of York Centre, across Canada and around the world, millions of Jewish families will observe a millennia-old tradition, retelling the story of Exodus at the Seder table. Some of us this year may be celebrating alone, and others will be celebrating with family members on Zoom, together yet apart. Though this year we cannot gather, the story of Passover, of triumph over hardship and liberation from oppression, is a timeless reminder of the lessons that guide us through our challenges today. The spirit of our communities in overcoming the pandemic, in working together to protect our most vulnerable, give us reason to celebrate. It is a community that is strong, resilient, and compassionate, and truly an important part of the rich and diverse tapestry of Canada. As we see vaccinations increasing and anticipation of an end to the pandemic, the arrival of Passover, the holiday of spring, Chag HaAviv, reassures us in the hope that perhaps a timely, modern, but temporary rewording of the Haggadah is appropriate this year. Next year...
The honourable member for Wellington-Halton Hill.
Madam Speaker, there's been an alarming rise in discrimination and racism against Canadians of Asian descent. Asians have been attacked in public, yelled at, spit at, and subject to online hate and discrimination just for being Asian. It's clear that despite the tremendous progress we've made as Canadians in recent decades to combat racism and discrimination and to build a society where Canadians of all races, religions, and creeds can live freely, more work needs to be done. I'm proud of being of Asian descent and proud of the contributions our community has made to the building of this country, including the sacrifices made in constructing the railway that laid the basis of this country through Confederation. I'm proud of the contributions we continue to make in law, medicine, science, the arts, business, and politics. Let us all in this House and as Canadians come together to denounce this racism and discrimination and to build a better Canada.
Member for Foothills.
The Agriculture Minister pretends to support farmers, but in reality is negligent when needed most. The Minister is complicit in saddling producers with a farm-killing carbon tax, voted against exempting grain drying from the carbon tax, and the Liberals are increasing this tax by 33% next week, which will further devastate Canadian agriculture. When farm groups asked for $2.6 billion in COVID support, she offered just $125 million and told farmers to drain their Agri-Invest accounts, money they did not have. This is hard to accept when the Liberals spend $250 million on an Asian infrastructure bank, $225 million on quarantine hotels. At the FPT meeting yesterday, the minister had a chance to support farmers, but once again, she walked away and took $75 million with her. Instead of offering support, the Liberals are hiking carbon taxes and withholding $75 million from Canadian farm families. Conservatives can be counted on to unleash agriculture's true potential and get Canada's economy growing again.
A member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Madam Speaker, we're in a housing crisis in Canada. Many people are finding it very difficult to secure a roof over their heads, and it's often impossible for people who find themselves homeless through mental illness or addiction. I've been very proud of the hard work and collaboration of various groups in my hometown of Penticton to find and build homes for the homeless, as well as housing for low-income families and seniors. And the government of British Columbia has really stepped up in the last 4 years as well. It's been impressive, but it hasn't been perfect. We've hit a bump in the road as projects for people who need wraparound services have caused concern in the community. This is not the time for verbal sparring. It's not the time to say this can't be done, but it is a time to sit down with those who know the needs of the homeless community, to listen to neighborhood concerns, and find the funding and solutions that ensure neighbors feel safe and that no one will be left out on the street. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Shefford.
The honourable member for Shefford. Madam Speaker, today I would like to tell colleagues about an important campaign. The National Invisible Work Day, created in 2001 by the Women's Association for Education and Social Action, or AFIAS. In 2010, thanks to Bloc Québécois member Nicole Demers, a motion was carried unanimously so that the first Tuesday of April would enable us to reflect on this important issue. But since then, the issue has remained invisible, no pun intended. If there is one thing that the pandemic has reminded us, it is that invisible work has suddenly become very visible. With lockdowns, school and work being done at home, and caring for loved ones, and so on. So I would like to thank the FAS for all their work to raise awareness among the public and decision makers to recognize invisible work, which adds so much to women's cognitive burden. Invisible work is work. Thank you.
The member for Souris Moose Mountain.
Madam Speaker, after over 2 years without a federal budget, Canadians are looking for some security and certainty for the future, especially when it comes to jobs. The Prime Minister seems to think that he and his government somehow know what is best for the people of my home province of Saskatchewan and all Canadians across the country. His Ottawa knows best approach to his economic reset will do absolutely nothing to help hardworking Canadians who just want to be able to pay their bills and put food on the table. Canadians want a hand up, not a handout. Thankfully, there are other options. We Conservatives have put forward Canada's recovery plan, which would enact a comprehensive strategy to put Canadians back to work across the country. We will secure jobs, secure accountability, secure mental health, secure the country, and secure our economy. Unlike the Liberals, we will focus on the hardest hit sectors, such as small business, and we will work to ensure that Canada provides the necessary incentives needed to create an environment that encourages investment rather than hinders it, in all industries for all Canadians.
The honourable member for Halifax West.
Madam Speaker, today is Purple Day, a day dedicated to increasing awareness about epilepsy, a neurological disorder of the central nervous system, specifically the brain. My friend Cassidy Megan created the idea of Purple Day in 2008, motivated by her own struggles with epilepsy. Since then, Purple Day has continued to grow and helps to dispel myths, reduce stigma, and helps those who live with epilepsy know they are not alone. In 2012, I was delighted when Parliament gave unanimous support to my private member's bill C-278, an act respecting a day to increase public awareness about epilepsy. The bill became law, making March 26th officially Purple Day in Canada. Now, each year on this date, people on every continent and in over 70 countries wear purple and host events in support of people with epilepsy. This cause is very important to me, and I'm so proud of Cassidy Megan for her ongoing work to grow Purple Day and raise global awareness of epilepsy.
Oral questions, questions orales, l'honorable.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Auditor General yesterday clearly said that she was discouraged with regards to the work carried out by the government with regards to our border. That was a year ago now. Canadians are concerned with vaccine supply. We know that India has decided to reduce the exports. The European Union has also tightened access to vaccines, and Canada needs vaccines. So why are there delays?
Minister.
Madame la Présidente, bien sûr. Madam Speaker, of course, we are overjoyed by the fact that we have reached our 6 million vaccine total targets for the first quarter, and we expect 3 million more doses next week. Yes, there was a few delays with one provider because of issues with that company and quality control, but Madam Speaker, we are determined to continue our momentum forward with regards to vaccine import and supply for all Canadians. The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Madam Speaker, we have to be honest but also coherent. The government is saying one thing and then it says something completely different. Tuesday at the Government Operations Committee, the Minister of Supply said, we do not anticipate any interruption in deliveries from Europe. But yesterday, the very same minister issued a statement saying Moderna's vaccines will not be shipped as planned in the next week. Well, who to believe? The Wednesday minister or the Thursday minister? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, of course. Yesterday, the minister published a communiqué to note that she had just received new information from the company in question. This was a quality control issue, just a slight delay of a number of days for 600,000 vaccines for Canada, which means that next week we will receive 3 million vaccine doses for provinces and territories. And this for the momentum that we have clearly managed to establish with regards to delivering vaccines for Canadians. The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Well, we got an answer, so we had to believe the Thursday minister, not the Wednesday minister. Anyway, this is the truth of the matter. When there is a vaccine supply issue, there are fewer Canadians that are vaccinated, which means that economic recovery is delayed. And this is why all this is important. the government has not negotiated assurances with suppliers, and that is why Canada is falling behind. Is the government aware that its failures are delaying the end of confinement? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, I can state and reassure my honourable colleague that the government is working hard on the matter, and that's why we have been able to make 2 million doses from AstraZeneca arrive earlier than expected. 1.5 million doses that will arrive from the States next week, thanks to our agreement with the US government. And so, Madam Speaker, we found that we can receive vaccines and import them before when they were expected to arrive, and that's what we'll do.
Wellington, Halton Hills.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A very simple question for the government. At the same time as the trial of Mr. Kovrig was taking place last Friday in northern China, and at the same time as the trial of Mr. Spaver's trial taking place in northern China, and the same time as the trial of Mr. Kovrig was taking place in Beijing last Monday, the government transferred $40 million to the China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, China's attempt to expand its influence throughout the Indo-Pacific region. Why is the government not using every tool at its disposal, including the suspension of this payment, to secure the release of Mr. Kovrig and Mr. Spaver?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, our number one priority at the moment is to secure the release of two Canadians, Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig, who have been arbitrarily detained on trumped-up charges by the Chinese government, and we will spare no effort to get their safe return home. And we will continue to point out that China is practicing an unacceptable diplomacy by engaging in arbitrary detention.
The honourable member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Madam Speaker, the government says it likes to work multilaterally, but often doesn't when given the chance. In 2015, President Obama and Vice President Biden asked the government not to join the China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And now, several years later, it's clear President Biden was right about China's threats in Indo-Pacific. And now Mr. Kovrig and Mr. Spaver are paying the price. Will the government admit it made a mistake, suspend these payments, and withdraw from the China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, we do indeed work with our allies when we want to bring up extremely serious problems that are occurring with China, namely the issue of arbitrary detention and the gross violations of human rights that are occurring in Xinjiang to the Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities. And we will work with our partners multilaterally in a coordinated fashion to bring these extremely important issues to the attention of China, and we will continue to do so until those problems are resolved.
The Honourable Member for Joliette. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yesterday, the Canadian Medical Association revealed that the cost of caring for seniors will reach $490 billion over the next 10 years. Imagine that, Madam Speaker. $490 billion. And that's just to take care of seniors. That doesn't count childcare, serious illness, mental health, and we could go on. That is exactly why, in tabling its budget yesterday, Quebec repeated that it must increase health transfers until Ottawa covers 35% of expenditures. When will the government stop turning a blind eye to the explosion in healthcare needs? The Honourable Minister. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to answer this question. The Prime Minister has taken the time to meet all of his counterparts in the provinces and territories, and they were talking health, amongst other things. We've invested $500 million to help seniors and others access essential services like food delivery. We invested $20 extra million. We invested $350 million in various organisations. I can continue. We will always be here for seniors. The Honourable Member for Joliette. Madam Speaker, I can't believe it. 490 billion is what I said, and the minister talks of 200 million and 500 million. I'm not reassured whatsoever. Ottawa's cutting healthcare. Everyone is saying it. The Canadian Medical Association, the Conference Board, the Council of the Federation, the Quebec National Assembly, the unions, and even the House of Commons here. And Quebec proved it again in its budget yesterday by investing $10 billion more, whilst the federal share continues to decline. Its share, which was 50%, will fall below 18% within 20 years. And so the Liberals should stop repeating that they are here for Quebec and the provinces. But even the provinces and Quebec are saying the opposite. So when will they do their part? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. I would like to thank my colleague for raising this point. The Honourable Minister. Some technical issues. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. As I mentioned, the Prime Minister is in constant communication with his counterparts in provinces and territories. It's a subject that has been raised. The Prime Minister has committed himself to working on this file. We will continue this work to help all Canadians. We are also enacting measures to disburse OAS, for example, as quickly as possible, and we want to process requests as rapidly as possible. We're talking about several billions of dollars. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. The Auditor General of Canada is categorical. The Public Health Agency of Canada has failed in its mandate during the pandemic because of Conservative and Liberal underfunding. This agency underestimated the effects of COVID-19 and was not ready to protect the population. The agency didn't even tell people correctly in both official languages, which once again flouted Francophone rights and Francophone safety. Will the Liberals rectify the problem and make sure that the PHAC and the public service receive all they need to protect us from any further pandemics? The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, and I'll say we have a huge debt of gratitude to the civil servants that have worked so hard throughout the pandemic to protect Canadians. In fact, the Public Health Agency of Canada has expanded by more than 1,000 employees, including 150 new scientists. There's $690.7 million invested in PHAC over 2 years in the fall 2020 economic statement, and I look forward to the member opposite's support for passing C-14.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
The Auditor General's report clearly shows that the federal government's pandemic response failed Canadians. Issues were flagged as far back as 1999 and emphasized after the 2003 SARS and 2009 H1N1 outbreaks. Yet the Public Health Agency of Canada failed to address these long-standing problems. It's inconceivable that Canada used risk assessment tools for domestic outbreaks when it was clear at the outset that it was an international one. How can the Liberals justify these kinds of errors? And will the minister assure Canadians she'll fix the many problems highlighted by this report so Canada is never in this position?
L'Honorable Ministre.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I would agree with the member opposite that we can never be in this position again. And that's indeed why we are committing over $690 million in the fall economic statement. I look forward to her support for the passage of Bill C-14. This is, of course, an investment in the Public Health Agency of Canada to continue their hard work. As I've mentioned, we've added well over 1,000 employees since the beginning of the pandemic, and we will continue to stop at nothing to ensure we have a world-class public health agency.
The Honourable Member for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
Madam Speaker, the Minister of National Defence said he can't involve himself in investigations, but Wednesday, the Minister ordered the Chief of Defence Staff to review an investigation that just closed. And the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service told committee that the Minister can absolutely refer investigations to them. Can the Minister appreciate that to many serving women that these different responses can be perceived as hypocritical and inconsistent?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Minister has asked Lieutenant General Eyre to review how this matter was handled. Let me be clear. The Minister has not directed any investigation. Drawing an elected official, a politician, into the sequence of an investigation would have been wrong and dangerous. Politicizing any investigation threatens a just outcome for those who come forward. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
Madam Speaker, the Minister has said he referred the matter to the Privy Council for investigation. The Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, who would have handled it, said he was never even made aware of allegations against General Vance. The Minister has said the Ombudsman should have investigated. But current Ombudsman Greg Lick told committee yesterday that Kerry Walburn acted exactly the way an Ombudsman should. What lessons has the Minister personally learned from this failure to investigate, and what actions has he taken to ensure the same mistakes don't happen again?
Excellent. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, as we have said, the Minister followed the proper processes. When the former Ombudsman came to the Minister, he brought the matter to the Privy Council office, who reached out to the former Ombudsman the very next day to obtain the information to start an investigation, but that information was not provided. The former National Security Advisor was not part of that process because if the Conservatives had actually read the entire email, he said, this is not necessarily unusual, particularly if PCO senior personnel were not able to obtain information that would have allowed and warranted the pursuit of an investigation. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Lakeland.
Madam Speaker, the Auditor General says the Liberals failed and put Canadians' well-being, safety, and the economy at risk. They delayed closing the borders when they should have, but were still unprepared. The border is in chaos. Agents can't keep up with changes. The Public Safety Minister still hasn't delivered training that he promised. This week, the Liberals voted against our call for a data-driven plan to get life and paychecks back to normal. How can Canada reopen safely with this ongoing incompetence and uncertainty?
The Honourable Minister.
Oui, merci. Merci, Madame Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank the Auditor General of Canada for her report. Recommendations have been made and concerted efforts will be done. For a follow-up, we will continue to examine recommendations made by the AG's report for our future activities, and I would like to reassure the opposition member that means have been put forward to make sure that CBSA officers have all the information necessary to do their work in a unique context.
Member for Lakeland.
Well, the U.S.-Canada border moves $2 billion a day in goods, crucial to Canada's economy. For these essential workers, it's a gamble. Told they're exempt by public health and overturned by border agents, could even get a $3,000 fine, while the NHL and elites, they get special treatment. An Ontarian who's crossed between auto plants for 20 years says it, quote, depends on which customs agent you ask. I wrote for clear answers, but the public safety and health ministers can't decide who's in charge. The U.S. and the U.K. have recovery plans. Where's Canada's plan to secure our future?
The Honourable Minister.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I would like to thank the member for her important question. As a response to the pandemic, the border closed for discretionary travel, and CBSA increased its support for frontline CBSA officers and allowing them a 24/7 access to support. They also made sure that agents and officers understood what the new rules were, and so they organized information sessions so that all pertinent information be related to officers.
Madam Speaker, in a scathing report yesterday, the Auditor General confirmed what the Parliamentary Budget Officer has been saying all along. The Liberal government has no idea what they're doing when it comes to infrastructure. They let $9 billion lapse, and they don't have basic accountability measures in place. They have no idea if their plan is even working. This is bad news for communities looking forward to new important projects, and the billions in lost projects due to lapsed funds is bad news for workers who have missed out on 3 construction seasons. Why should Canadians believe that this Liberal government will get anything built in the future when they can't do it now?
The Honourable Minister.
Speaker, through the Investing in Canada plan, we committed over $180 billion over 12 years for infrastructure that benefits Canadians. From public transit to trading ports, broadband networks to energy systems, community services to natural spaces. 5 years into the plan, we've already invested $81 billion in over 67,000 projects, 90% of them completed or underway. My goal has always been to ensure multiple benefits from every dollar spent. That means jobs, growing the economy, that means more inclusive communities, and that also means climate change. Certainly hope the party opposite supports that.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable.
The honourable member for Beauport-Côte-de-Beaupré, Île d'Orléans, Charlevoix.
Capel, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Actually, the Auditor General found that half of the Liberal government's $188 billion program, over $90 billion, actually comes from the previous Conservative government's plan. They're putting their name on our homework, and they can't even track the money they have spent. 20% of the department's funds isn't even getting out the door. That's $9 billion shuffled around the department. Construction workers were counting on those funds to get their jobs back. Can the minister explain why she allowed $9 billion to get lost in her own department instead of getting shovels in the ground?
Minister for Infrastructure and Communities.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to tell the member opposite that we've actually been able to approve through my department alone close to 2,000 projects over the past year. That's getting shovels in the ground, that's creating jobs, that's getting growth and tackling climate change and building more inclusive communities. Talk to any mayor or city councillor across the country how these projects are improving lives in their community, from Canadian-made electric buses in Brampton to the new McLaughlin Point wastewater treatment plant in Vancouver Island. But I think what Canadians want to know, last election, the party opposite, the Conservative Party, said that they were going to cut infrastructure spending. So will they do that again?
The honourable member for Beauport-Côte-de-Beaupré, Île d'Orléans, Charlevoix. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, today Quebec is lifting restrictions on the performing arts. A vaccine against sadness, theatres can reopen, even in the red zone. The Bloc Québécois is therefore making 6 urgent proposals to ensure predictability and safety for the cultural sector. Ottawa must create a recovery fund to guarantee the viability and sustainability of reopening venues for cultural events. It takes direct financial support to keep performers on our stage. Ottawa needs to help Quebec City compensate for box office losses due to physical distancing. We are reaching out to the minister. What will they do? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for the question. We have invested and support to performing arts. It is very important. And in fact, we recently invested more than $181 million new to continuously support performing arts. We know it's important and we are here to help them. The honourable member for Beauport-Côte-de-Beaupré, Île d'Orléans, Charlevoix. Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is not enough. We know that many programmes don't work for 40% of artists. Ottawa must support the recovery of the performing arts. At a time when more than 40% of artists are either considering a career change or suffering from major depression, we must compensate lost revenue for festival and events. Federal support programs should be more flexible. We need to encourage audience participation with a tax credit and more health measures. We must encourage participation, and today, theatres are reopening with courage, and the Bloc is reaching out once again. What is the minister going to do? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you. This year, far too many artists and cultural interveners were unable to ply their trade and interact with the public. What we're saying to them is that their government does understand their plight, and we understand that a continuous support is necessary. We have invested $181.5 million. We're working for the interest of various interveners in the cultural sphere of Canada, and we will continue to work with them to stimulate creativity.
Madam Speaker, earlier this week, the Coalition of Hardest Hit announced that 60% of Canada's hardest hit businesses will not make it to the end of the year if they do not receive extended support in the upcoming April federal budget. The coalition is asking for certainty from the federal government by way of extending both the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy and the Canadian Emergency Rent Subsidy to the end of this calendar year. Will the government commit to these critical measures now, or will these businesses be forced to continue to wait for the clarity and certainty they so badly need?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member opposite for this important question. From the outset of this pandemic, we understood that COVID-19 created immense costs for businesses, particularly in some of the sectors that were hardest hit. That's why we moved quickly to establish support programs that would help them keep the doors open and, importantly, help their workers keep food on the table. We recently made an announcement that we were extending some of these emergency support programs, such as the wage subsidy, to the end of June, and we will continue to be there for businesses no matter what it takes, as long as it takes to see them through this pandemic.
Deputy de Beauce.
The Honourable Member for Beauce. Madam Speaker, it's all well and good to talk about economic recovery, but to achieve it, we must find a solution to the scarcity of labour in certain regions of the country. How can our entrepreneurs produce, build and innovate if they do not have the necessary workforce to fill their orders? When will the government respond to the many Beauce employers who have been waiting for months to let in the foreign workers they have recruited themselves? What is it doing to encourage the interregional movement of workers in Canada to meet the needs of regions like ours in Beauce? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. The Honourable Minister.
And I appreciate the question. Our government recognizes the integral role foreign workers play in Canada's agriculture and seafood sector. We have streamlined requirements and introduced priority processing for applications and work permits in these sectors. We have also launched a temporary measure that allows workers already in Canada to start a new job while their permit application is being processed. While COVID-19 has presented unique challenges to Canada's job market, we continue to support workers, employers, and our provincial partners to ensure the continued strength of Canada's food sector and supply chain. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Regina, Wisconsin.
Madam Speaker, SaskTel is the largest phone company and internet service provider in the province of Saskatchewan. Last week, the government of Saskatchewan announced that this Crown Corporation will not be using Huawei to develop the province's 5G network. Instead, SaskTel has decided to go with Samsung, a South Korean firm. Madam Speaker, if the provincial government of Saskatchewan can say no to Huawei, then why can't this government?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, our government's going to continue to ensure that Canadian networks are kept safe and secure. We've been saying this for months. Canadians can be ensured that we're not going to compromise on matters of national security, and we're never going to comment on specific companies. An examination of emerging 5G technology and associated security and economic considerations is underway, and we're going to keep relying on our experts. We're going to keep relying on our international considerations with our allies, and we're going to make best decisions for Canadians in due course. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Shepherd.
I wrote to the Heritage Minister 4 months ago regarding substantiated claims of harassment, verbal abuse, and intolerance levied against the Canadian artistic swimming team's coaching staff by athletes on the team, including an athlete and constituent, Cassie. 4 months and no answer. No coaches have been fired, no apologies to the athletes, but Cassie deserves an answer. The artistic swimming NSO is funded by Sport Canada. So what is the Heritage Minister going to do to fix this awful situation?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the question from my honourable colleague. I have been in touch with athletes, and I have been in touch with officials, and we understand that artistic swimming is taking measures to address these complaints received. We're also working very hard on a safe sport mechanism, an independent safe sport mechanism, which will be implemented in the coming weeks and months. Sport Canada has had the opportunity to speak with Canadian artistic swimming regarding these allegations, and the government is working hard with the sport community to establish these mechanisms as quickly as possible.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Under the Liberal government, Canada is not back. Canada has dropped to 75th place in the list of countries contributing to peacekeeping efforts. Canada's official development assistance is lower than it was under Stephen Harper's Conservatives. And perhaps most shocking of all, today, on the 6th anniversary of the conflict in Yemen, a humanitarian crisis that has been described as the worst place on earth, Canada continues to sell arms to Saudi Arabia. Why is the government continuing to fuel one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
And I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for the question. I had the honour to participate in the pledging conference for Yemen a couple of weeks ago, and Canada actually increased our humanitarian assistance. When it comes to official development assistance, we increased by over $1.7 billion in last year alone, and we have been stepping up in the fight when it comes to COVID-19. We are responding to humanitarian needs around the world, including in Yemen, and we will continue to do so. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for London Fanshawe.
Madam Speaker, recently media coverage has revealed that several hate-based anti-LGBTQ2IS+ and 45 anti-choice groups have received the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. In 2018, the Prime Minister stated that organizations that had an explicit goal of reversing a woman's right to choose would not qualify for any federal funding. Will the government revoke funding to groups with goals that are harmful to Canadians?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for this important question. At the outset of this pandemic, we made a decision to extend supports to ensure that workers remained on payroll, and we did not discriminate as to which kind of an employer that employees worked for. We wanted to ensure that families could continue to keep food on the table. From the very beginning of this pandemic, however, one of the strengths of our response has been our willingness to iterate and consider how they can change programs to ensure that they meet the needs of Canadians. I look forward to continuing to see these programs evolve and would be happy to have a follow-up conversation with the honourable member about this most recent concern.
The honourable member for the Northwest Territories.
Madam Speaker, I was joined by the Minister of Canadian Heritage to meet with the Gwich'in Tribal Council, recipients of the Indigenous Languages and Cultures Program, to learn about Indigenous language projects in Northwest Territories. Thanks to the funding received, the Gwich'in Tribal Council is able to deliver 2,700 hours of language nest programming and 224 hours of language and culture classes in Gwich'in, as well as producing copies of textbooks and teaching guides in Gwich'in and English. Can the Minister of Canadian Heritage tell this House what the government is doing to reclaim, revitalize, maintain, and strengthen Indigenous languages?
Minister.
I would like to begin by thanking the member from the Northwest Territories for his work to support Indigenous languages. Budget 2019 provided $337.5 million or $0.7 million over 5 years and $115.7 million ongoing to support the preservation, promotion, and revitalization of Indigenous languages. When we formed government in 2015, this amount was only $5 million per year for all languages and communities across the country. With this investment through Budget 2019, we were able to fund 372 language activities across communities. We are continuing to work hard and work in partnership. Thank you.
The honourable member for Colonial Lake Country.
Madam Speaker, the Liberals must act on the EU's latest COVID-19 vaccine export measures. Canada is the second largest recipient of EU-produced vaccines, and we could be a target. Since January, when this first emerged, the Liberals didn't get a written exemption for Canada, as nearly 100 other countries have. In his call earlier this week with European Commission President, the Prime Minister failed to receive assurance that Canada is exempt from these measures. Can the Trade Minister guarantee that Canada will not see a reduction in our vaccine imports?
L'honorable ministre.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I would just like to point out a couple of facts. Firstly, the 92 countries remaining on the exemption list for these new EU measures are all low-income countries. There is not a single high-income country on that list. And furthermore, as the member should know by now, not a single one of our vaccine shipments from the European Union have been blocked or delayed because of these new EU export measures. Anyone actually familiar with the political situation in Europe at the moment understands that Canada is not the intended target, and neither are either our Moderna or Pfizer vaccines.
The Honourable Member for Belfast is Etcheman-Lévis. Madam Speaker, once again, the Liberals are dragging their feet. The Parliamentary Budget Officer's report is damning. The costs and delays of the shipbuilding strategy are skyrocketing, and the Auditor General's report is also sounding the alarm, saying that we need a polar icebreaker now. countries are rushing to the Arctic for shipping and natural resources. So what are the Liberals waiting for to finally award the contract to build a Canadian polar icebreaker instead of deferring it endlessly? The Honourable Minister.
Madame la Présidente, comme mon...
Madam Speaker, as my honourable colleague knows well, because he was part of the government which limited the national shipbuilding strategy to only 2 shipyards, well, he knows well that since we were elected, we have been working to get ships in the water, to get ships built, to have realistic cost expectations, unlike the former government, and we will continue to do this work. This includes working on a polar icebreaker, and we hope that we will have news shortly.
South Surrey White Rock.
Madam Speaker, on Wednesday, the Liberals voted against a data-driven reopening plan. Let that sink in for a moment. The United Kingdom has a plan. The U.S. has a plan. Liberals claim it's not within their jurisdiction. But I've heard this same government promote tighter restrictions. The supports can only go so far. Every business owner in my riding that I've talked to doesn't want handouts. They want a plan to safely get back to work. What does this Liberal government have against small businesses here and across the country?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And as the member opposite knows, we've worked closely with provinces, territories, indeed local municipalities to ensure that Canadians are safe from contracting and dying of COVID-19. That's the priority, Madam Speaker. We cannot have a healthy, strong economy if people are too sick to go to work. We will be there, as we have, for small business, for communities, for individuals who are struggling with the effects of COVID-19 and the economic impact it's had on them. Madam Speaker, we are all in this together.
The Honourable Member for Essex.
Madam Speaker, the manufacturing sector in Canada and the U.S. has the best COVID protocols in place. They can't afford to interrupt their supply chain and the flow of goods any longer. This government says it wants to build back better. To these business owners and their workers, it seems more like build back never. Enough inaction. When is this government going to give clear and concise direction to CBSA and PHAC before more jobs and contracts are lost due to their inaction? When?
The Honourable Minister.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente. Je veux...
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for the very important question. Yes, it has been challenging to deal with managing the border, but CBSA has set up a 24/7 service to provide the best information possible to frontline workers to make sure that they can make the best possible decisions. When it comes to the essential workers crossing the border, those decisions will be made, and we wanted to make sure that this work continues.
L'honorable député de Rimouski.
The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata-Basque. Madam Speaker, the fishing season is compromised in the Magdalen Islands because 40% of the capacity of Cap-aux-Meules Harbour has been cut by the federal government. It's not complicated. No wharf, no crabs. So we asked the Minister and the Member of Parliament for Gaspésie-les-Îles-de-la-Madeleine what she was going to do to solve the problem. Imagine, she blamed Transport Canada. Now, this is a difficult problem. The Liberal ministers will have to stop playing hot potato and find an actual solution. What are they going to do about this port crisis in the Magdalen Islands? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Minister understands the importance of this issue for residents, and she's spoken with the mayor and residents of the Magdalen Islands, as well as various stakeholders on the ground. The decision to improve the wharf there is a safety issue, and we are actively looking for solutions. We're working closely with our partners on the Magdalen Islands and the fishing industry. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata-Basque. Madam Speaker, this isn't just a question of safety, it's a question of economic vitality. It's the responsibility of the federal government to ensure that ports and wharves are in good condition. If they haven't assumed their responsibilities and the infrastructure at Cap-aux-Meules is deteriorating, it's their responsibility to find a solution. Staff on site at the port are needed to monitor the situation. Immediate and urgent repairs are required if this is the situation. And if the federal government can't do this, they need to promise the fishermen and businesses that they will not lose a penny because of the Liberal minister's negligence. What will they do? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, I want to reassure my colleague that the fishing season on the islands has not been compromised. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Several committees have had their work stalled by Liberal obstruction tactics. Yesterday, the Procedures and House Affairs Committee was obstructed by Liberals who've been talking since February the 23rd about everything from their favourite Christopher Nolan movie to spoiled yogurt in their office fridges. The Liberals continue to waste time to protect the Prime Minister from having to explain why he shut down Parliament last August when the WE scandal heat became too much for him. Why is this government wasting time of the committees to protect the Prime Minister? Thank you very much.
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, I've said it many times. We believed in the work of committees. They're extremely important work done by all members, but they decide on their own agenda. And my colleague from the Conservative Party knows that. And we're always going to be there to participate and help the work of the committees because, as I said, it's extremely important. And I'd like the Conservatives to stop playing those games.
The honourable member for Yorkton, Melville.
Speaker, it's been 5 years since our Conservative government implemented a Canadian Victims' Bill of Rights. For over a year, victims and their families have been calling on Parliament to examine the strengths and shortcomings of the bill, as a 5-year review was written into the legislation. 6 years have passed without action. From expanding assisted death to targeting law-abiding firearms owners, it's clear that the Justice Minister has his own priorities. Why aren't the rights of victims his priority?
L'honorable ministre.
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank the Federal Ombudsman and Victims of Crime for their progress report on the Victims' Bill of Rights. With respect to the question that was presented by the member opposite, disagree with the foundation of it. We are listening to the call to take more action on victims' bills on victims' rights. We are listening and we are ensuring that the upcoming parliamentary review of the Victims' Bill of Rights will take place. We are indeed ensuring that victims' rights are treated with dignity, compassion, and respect. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, it's been 4 months since the Quebec Court of Appeal found consecutive sentencing to be unconstitutional, thereby reducing the sentence of the mass murderer who killed 6 people and attempted to kill 6 others at a Quebec City mosque from 40 years to 25 years. After 4 months, when will this government do the right thing and join Quebec's Attorney General in defending this law so that at least some semblance of justice can be done for the victims?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, this case is obviously a troubling one for all members of this House, including Muslim Canadians such as myself. The finding in the decision with respect to consecutive sentences is a matter that is under review by the Government of Canada and by the Department of Justice. We will make our position known when it is necessary to do so, but we stand by the victims of this heinous tragedy and against all crimes of hate. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Scarborough North.
Madam Speaker, members of the Tamil community in Scarborough North have shared that their loved ones were lost, displaced, injured, and went missing during the 26-year Sri Lankan armed conflict. A thorough, independent international investigation that leads to truth, justice, and reconciliation is needed now. The United Nations Human Rights Council plays a key role in preventing future serious violations and in addressing those of the past. Can the Minister of Foreign Affairs provide an update on the latest actions taken by Canada to address human rights violations and accountability in Sri Lanka?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, I want to thank the member of Scarborough North for his important question and advocacy on this matter. Canada, as part of the core group on this resolution, worked alongside members of the Council for the passage of Resolution 46.1 in Geneva this week. This resolution mandates the High Commissioner for Human Rights to collect, consolidate, analyze, and preserve information and evidence. This is an important step towards accountability in Sri Lanka. Canada has and always will stand up for human rights in Sri Lanka and around the world.
The honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Over a year ago, Conservative, Green, and NDP caucuses sent a joint letter to the Immigration Minister calling for a special program to bring persecuted Afghan, Sikh, and Hindu refugees to Canada as soon as possible. Women and children are isolated in their homes out of fear, places of worship have faced terrorist attacks, and innocent men, women, and children have their lives taken away, all for practicing their own faith. Why does the minister remain silent and show no action, letting these Hindu and Sikh refugees suffer at the hands of ISIS?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, Canada has one of the most robust asylum systems in the world, and we will always uphold human rights. I have worked with my honourable colleague across the way as well as with the community, and we will continue to ensure that Canada is a country where those who are fleeing persecution and violations of human rights will be able to find safe sanctuary.
The honourable member for West Nova.
Madam Speaker, on February 23rd, I wrote the Minister of DFO and CRA regarding the new fisheries regulations that go in force on April 1st, a few days away. There are conflicting rules between DFO and CRA that need to be addressed. Many fishing enterprises utilize spousal income splitting to help spread the tax burden, which is allowed under CRA, but now disallowed under the DFO's new owner-operator policy. The situation is another example of how this government is not taking the fishery seriously. Can the minister or will the minister fix it before the April 1st deadline?
The honourable minister.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank this member for this important question. It's important to know that we respect the tradition of having families participate in fisheries. These new regulations that are going to be implemented in April 1st mean that captain's log are going to have to record every individual that is active in fishing. It does not have to record individuals, family members that are not active in fishing. And if that member requires any further clarification for anybody else in their riding, I'd be happy to follow up.
The honourable member for North Okanagan Shuswap.
Madam Speaker, the Fisheries Department's reinterpretation of regulations completely blindsided spot prawn harvesters in BC. DFO's reinterpretation would actually force spot prawn harvesters to degrade their catch and accept less money for their work. And what was the minister's response? Well, she deferred the harmful measure for a year, creating even further uncertainty. Whether it's this year or next, this policy is harmful. When will the minister stop slapping harvesters down and reverse DFO's unwarranted policy change?
The honourable minister.
Madam Speaker, our government supports a cautious approach to fisheries management, one that prioritizes the health and conservation of stocks. This season, CNP's enforcement posture towards the practice of tubbing will be one of outreach and education, which means tubbing will occur this season. At the same time, Pacific Region of DFO will engage with industry to discuss and discover possible solutions for the following season and beyond. We will work with stakeholders on this matter, Madam Speaker.
The
honourable member for Moncton Riverview Dieppe. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through the history of humanity, technology has never evolved faster than today. It's now more important than ever for us to stay up to date with the most recent developments when it comes to cybersecurity. Even in industries such as agriculture, which are becoming more vulnerable to malware and hackers. Can the Minister of Public Safety inform this House of the recent measures that were set up in order to strengthen protections for Canadian businesses? The Honourable Minister.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente, et merci.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the colleague for this important question. Our government is aware that the threat of cyber attacks is a serious one for businesses in every sector. That's why the Minister announced yesterday that the Community Safety Knowledge Alliance will receive financing of over $500 million for a project that will strengthen cybersecurity in the agriculture sector specifically. This network will allow us to protect ourselves from cyber attacks and particularly in the agricultural sector. The government will continue to make essential investments to protect our infrastructure and improve cybersecurity.
The honourable member for Cowichan Malahat Langford.
Madam Speaker, last year off the southern Gulf Islands, a large bulk carrier dragged its anchor and drifted over 1,200 meters to hit another vessel. Luckily, no major damage was done this time. Transport Canada's own information reveals there were 102 occurrences of ships dragging anchor in this area over 5 years, raising serious safety and environmental concerns. Residents and local First Nations are calling for an end to anchorages in these waters. Will the minister commit to working with us to end southern BC anchorages before an environmental disaster occurs?
The Honourable Minister. The Honourable Minister. The Honourable Member for Don Valley East.
Madam Speaker, a few weeks ago, I met with Helmets to Hard Hats, an organization that supports the transition of veterans to civilian life. As the Minister is aware, veterans as young as 34 find it hard to transition to civilian life. The organization trains veterans in the building and construction trades. In order to be sustainable, they are requesting a funding of $785,000 per annum for 3 years. Could the Minister of Veterans Affairs please update the House on their request? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague from Don Valley East for this very important question. Helmets to Hard Hats is one of the many excellent organizations across Canada that serve veterans and their families. Our government introduced the Veterans and Family Wellbeing Fund to support these organizations and all of the great work they do on the ground supporting Canadian veterans. In 2019, we proudly supported Helmets to Hard Hats through this fund to help veterans seeking careers in construction and maintenance. We are at this time in the process of reviewing the applications of the Wellbeing Fund and will be able to have more information in the very near future. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
We have a point of order. The Honourable Member for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Speaker has reminded the House on numerous occasions that for those participating virtually to make sure their backdrops are nonpartisan and as neutral as possible. Unfortunately, as we witnessed today during question period, the member for Windsor-Tecumseh has seemed to have forgotten this. I'd kindly ask that you remind all members of the House to keep their backdrops neutral and nonpartisan. Thank you.
I appreciate the Honourable Member's point of order and information he provided. We will remind individuals, parliamentarians, to make sure that when they are participating virtually that their background should be neutral to avoid any partisan messages, and that will help alleviate having these points of order and having to repeat the same message over and over again. I have a point of order from the Honourable Member for Cowichan-Malahat-Langford.
Yes, Madam Speaker, a point of order. You know, one of my roles, not only as a member of the opposition, but as the elected representative for Cowichan-Malahat-Langford, is to hold this government to account. I asked a very clear question on an issue that matters to my riding, and neither the parliamentary secretary or the Minister of Transport stood up. I demand an answer to my question, Madam Speaker.
I have another point of order. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, there was an attempt. We were having some technical difficulties. If we could get the leave of the House, maybe the member could just repose his question, and we'd be more than happy to ensure that there's an answer.
I did allow for quite a bit of time to rectify the opportunity to answer. I will ask the House for unanimous consent to repose the question and to have the answer. Does the Honourable Member have unanimous consent to repose the question? Yes? Yes. Okay, the Honourable Member for Cowichan-Malahat-Langford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I was saying, last year off the southern Gulf Islands, a large bulk carrier dragged its anchor and drifted 1,200 meters to hit another vessel. And we were very lucky that this time no major damage was done. Now, Transport Canada's own information has revealed there are 102 occurrences of ships dragging anchor in this area over 5 years, and that raises serious safety and environmental concerns. Residents and local First Nations are calling for an end to anchorages in these waters. Will the minister commit to working with us to end southern BC anchorages before an environmental disaster occurs?
The Honourable Minister.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente. Et je tiens tout.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to apologize to my opposition colleague. I had an internet issue, but I'm very pleased to answer. The government strategy aims to... I'm sorry, I have to interrupt the honourable member. I'm going to ask the honourable member to start over because there were some issues with the video. Please start over. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will try to answer my colleague's question. This government's long-term strategy has 3 major targets. First of all, to improve anchoring in public ports, improve supply chains, trustworthiness and reliability in the long term, and improve the social impacts. The new interim protocol for anchoring has been created in collaboration with the Vancouver Fraser Valley Port and other organizations. And the new protocol was set up to meet the immediate concerns of these coastal communities. I can assure my colleague that the well-being of coastal communities is a priority for our government.
And that brings an end to question period. Tabling of documents. Introduction of government bills. Déclaration de ministre. Rapport de délégation inter...
Reports from interparliamentary delegations.
Presenting reports from committees. The Honourable Member for Hamilton East, Stony Creek.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to present in both official languages the report of the Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs entitled Main Estimates 2021-22, Vote 1 under Canadian High Arctic Research Station, Votes 1, 5, 10, and L5 under Department of Crown Indigenous Relations, and Votes 1, 5, and 10 under Department of Indigenous Services. Thank you.
Presenting reports from committees, the Honourable Member for Mississauga, Erin Mills.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have the honor today to present in both official languages the 8th report of the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights in relation to Bill C-218, an act to amend the Criminal Code sports betting. The committee has studied the bill and has decided to report the bill back to the House with amendment.
Presenting reports from committees, l'Honorable Député de Longueuil, Charles Lemoine.
The Honourable Member for Longueuil, Charles Lemoine. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to present in both official languages the 5th report of the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology on the Investment Canada Act. Thank you.
Dépôt de projet de loi émanant.
Introduction of private members' bills. First reading of Senate public bills.
Motions. Presenting petitions. The Honourable Member for Elgin, Elgin, Middlesex, London. Sorry. It's one of those. It's Friday.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and you're absolutely right. It's Friday, so that's no problem. I am here to present 3 petitions on behalf of Canadians. The first one is asking the government to acknowledge the alarming bouts of unrest in Tigray in Ethiopia. The signatories are asking this government to take action. Secondly, to draw attention, the next petition is to draw the government's attention to the Chinese communist regime's persecuting of the Falun Gong and to take action and to end the persecution and bring them to justice. Finally, on my third petition, I would like to draw attention to the international trafficking of human organs. Many signatories, once again, as we have seen multiple petitions on this, we are asking that the Canadian government, or the petitioners are asking the Canadian government to move quickly and to propose legislation on this travesty. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Petitions, the honourable member for Vancouver East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I have two petitions that I would like to table. The first is related to the spousal sponsorship application process and the TRV application process. The petitioners note that as it stands right now, the government has a section called 179B, which basically prevents people from reuniting with their loved ones if they have a spousal sponsorship application in place. And they are calling on the government to suspend the use of 179B so that people won't be denied on the grounds that they have strong ties in Canada. They're asking for the government to put in a special TRV tailored to family sponsorship, to create an ombudsperson to investigate complaints regarding assessments, and meaningfully implement the promise to help people of Lebanon, and to process Lebanese applications of visa offices in Beirut instead of Anakar. The second petition that I have, Madam Speaker, is also on immigration issues, and this one is related to the issue of family sponsorship related to parents and grandparents. The petitioners note that the government has scrapped the lottery system for parents-grandparents reunification and recognize that it was particularly flawed, but without any indication. And notice they brought that system back, one that they had acknowledged that was flawed. As such, the petitioners are calling on the government to explain their decision to return to the previously scrapped system of the parents-grandparents sponsorship program based on lottery, and to release documents related to the consultations that led to this change, to immediately undertake an open and publicly available study to create a better and just application process, and to recognize the positive benefits of family reunification.
Members to keep the tabling of petitions to short summaries. There's a lot of parliamentarians who want to table petitions. Tabling petitions, the member for Calgary-Shepparton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Happy Friday to you. First, I have three petitions to table today, so they are from constituents and Canadians all across Canada. The first one is on the Magnitsky Act. These petitioners are asking for the Magnitsky Act to be applied to those who are persecuting Falun Gong practitioners in mainland China. So these are the following people they would like to have sanctioned under Magnitsky: Jiang Zemin, Lu Gan, Liu Jing, Zhu Yongkang, Bo Xilai, Li Lanqing, Wu Gengsheng, Li Dongsheng, Shang Wei, Huang Jiefu, Sheng Zhushen, Wang Lijun, Shang Xiaowing, and Jia Chunyang for the persecution of Falun Gong practitioners in mainland China. The second petition draws the attention of the House of Commons to the continued plight of Venezuelan refugees, specifically to an event that happened near the country of Trinidad and Tobago, where the Coast Guard boarded a vessel of Venezuelan refugees fleeing the country in contravention of Section 2 of the Commonwealth Charter. So the undersigned are asking for the Government of Canada to request that the Commonwealth Secretary General launch an inquiry into the actions of the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard in contravention of Charter of Commonwealth, and urge the Government of Trinidad and Tobago to respect the human rights of Venezuelan refugees. And finally, Madam Speaker, I am tabling the petition on behalf of Canadians who are asking that the definition in C6 be amended and fixed in order to ensure that parents can speak with their own children about sexuality and gender, and to send house rules about those types of relationships. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Petitions, the honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honor to present a petition today on behalf of constituents concerned about the ongoing crisis of violence against women. The petitioners note this is particularly a crisis for Indigenous women and girls, referencing the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and calling for the Government of Canada to implement all of the recommendations and calls for action, and to ensure that across Canadian society, women have rights to leadership positions. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Presenting petitions, the honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have 5 petitions to present this afternoon. The first petition is with respect to Bill C6. Petitioners are supportive of the principle of banning conversion therapy. They ask the House to fix the definition contained in the bill. They recognize that poor drafting and problems with the definition create significant unintended consequences. They would limit conversations that could happen. They limit the ability for people to receive certain kinds of counseling that would seek to help individuals who are trying to manage things like sexual addiction. Petitioners ask the government to address these drafting problems and pass a better bill that bans conversion therapy. The second petition highlights the issue of the situation in Tigray in Ethiopia. Petitioners call for a stronger Canadian government response to that situation, including humanitarian support, calls for an end to violence, investigations into crimes that have taken place, as well as direct engagement with the Ethiopian and Eritrean government and assistance with short, medium, and long-term election monitoring. The third petition highlights the genocide of Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims in China. The House has already pronounced in terms of recognizing that genocide, but petitioners want to see the government respond and recognize that genocide. They also want to see the use of the Magnitsky Act to hold those involved in this genocide accountable for their actions, and the government must go much further on that. The fourth petition is with respect to Bill S-204, currently before the Justice and Human Rights Committee in the Senate. It's a bill that would make it a criminal offense for a Canadian to go abroad and receive an organ for which there hasn't been consent. Petitioners want to see this bill, S-204, passed as quickly as possible. Hopefully this Parliament will be the one to get it done, as long as we don't have an election too soon. And the fifth and final petition highlights the persecution of Falun Gong practitioners in China. It calls for, among other things, the use of Magnitsky sanctions and for the kind of legislation that I referred to in the previous petition, Bill S-204. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Presenting petitions, the honourable member for Victoria.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have two petitions to present today. I'm presenting a petition focused on the commercial rent subsidy program. Petitioners are concerned about the rules that exclude non-arm's length holders who conduct their business relationship in a 100% arm's length manner. The tourist industry has been affected more than most businesses. The petitioners explain that 90% of their income comes from international travelers, and that in this challenging time, businesses are falling through the cracks, and that they may not make it through the pandemic without the rent. They're urging the Government of Canada to review the legislation so businesses like theirs can qualify for support. And the second one, this petition is regarding the Windsor Causeway in Nova Scotia, which was constructed without proper fish passages and impedes fish migration, but most importantly impacts the endangered inner bay of Fundy Atlantic salmon. Nova Scotia is currently twinning Highway 101, and construction plans call for a test aboito to be built near the remaining channel of the Avon River. Petitioners talk about how the environmental assessment study inadequately explored the impacts on fish migration and options for dikes and a partial opening of the causeway. They're calling on the Minister of Environment and Climate Change to deny the approval of Nova Scotia's request to build an aboito at the Avon River until a full and proper environmental assessment study has been completed that addresses the impacts and shortfalls.
Presenting petitions, the honourable member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have two petitions that I'm pleased to present today with signatures from across Canada. The first petition initiated by constituents in Nanaimo, Ladysmith, and they're concerned that only a small portion of BC's ancient old-growth trees remain, and they're concerned about continuing logging of these old-growth ecosystems. They note that old-growth forests are instrumental for keeping carbon out of our atmosphere and for flood and fire mitigation. The petitioners are calling upon the Government of Canada to request that the Minister of Environment and Climate Change work with the provinces on protecting valley bottom, high productivity old-growth forests with large trees, and introduce federal legislation that protects old-growth forests. The second petition, the petitioners are concerned about the erosion of human rights in Poland. They're asking the Government of Canada to urgently condemn stigmatization, violence, and persecution against women, ethnic minorities, and LGBTQIA2S+ persons in Poland, to raise the matter of human rights in Poland at the ministerial level, to call on Poland's government to uphold its obligations under international human rights law and conventions, to engage bilaterally and multilaterally, including with the Equal Rights Coalition to protect human rights in Poland, and to support civil society groups defending human rights in Poland, including through Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy. Thank you.
Presenting petitions, the Honourable Member of Peace River Westlock.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I have 4 petitions to present today. I want to the first one is, whereas the petitioners from across Canada want to bring to the attention of this House, whereas Ethiopia is one of the largest recipients of Canadian international assistance. Elections were scheduled to take place in Ethiopia this year, and they call for an immediate end to the violence and restraints from all parties involved in the Tigray conflict, immediately call for humanitarian access to the region and independent monitoring. They're calling for the Canadian government to engage with the Ethiopian government and the Eritrean government to end this conflict. The next one I have to present today, Madam Speaker, is from Canadians from across the country. We're concerned about the definition of conversion therapy in Bill C-6. They're asking for the definition to be improved so that members of the LGBT community would continue to have support in their for the ability to choose their abilities to limit their sexual behavior or detransition. As therefore, they're calling on the ban for conversion therapy and to amend Bill C-6 to fix the definition. The next petition I have to present, Madam Chair, is from Canadians from across the country who are concerned about the scourge of organ trafficking. They're calling for the quick passage of Bill C-240 from the Senate, and they're calling for this House to pass that as well. And the final petition I have today, Madam Chair, is in regards to the Falun Gong in China. The Falun Gong are persecuted people in China. The people that signed this petition are calling on the Government of Canada to recognize this persecution and the mass murder regime of innocent people for their organs, including and not limited to the Canadian legislation to ban organ harvest tourism and to criminalize those involved, and to take every opportunity to criticize the Chinese Communist Party and their treatment of the Falun Gong. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Edmonton Manning.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I've got 2 petitions signed by Edmonton Manning residents as well as many other Canadians, one with 59 signatures, one with 47 signatures. They both call on, whereas extensive evidence points to 14 key officials and former officials of the Chinese Communist regime who demonstrate prime culpability in the human rights atrocities committed against Falun Gong practitioners in China. Therefore, we, the undersigned, urge the Government of Canada to deploy all legal sanctions, including the freezing of assets and barring of entering to Canada against these perpetrators under the Sergei Magnitsky Act. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Presenting petitions, the Honourable Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honor to present a petition signed by my constituents and other Canadians who wish to sound the alarm on the systemic eradication campaign being perpetrated by the Chinese Communist regime against peaceful Falun Gong practitioners. In this regard, there is substantial evidence of gross human rights violations, including torture, extrajudicial killings, and massive organ harvesting. The petitioners are calling on this government to forthwith impose Magnitsky sanctions on 14 current and former Chinese communist officials who bear prime culpability with respect to these atrocities. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Presenting petitions. Questions on the order paper. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I would ask that all questions be allowed to... Oops.
Agreed? Agreed and so ordered. Orders of the day, ordre du jour.
Ordre émanant du gouvernement, projet de loi émanant du gouvernement commune.
Resuming debate on the second reading of Bill C-11, the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, Digital Charter Implementation Act 2020.
Honourable Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was trying to organize the microphone. I think you can hear me, right? Yeah, you can hear me. Madam Speaker, honorable colleagues, I am proud to continue the second reading of Bill C-11, the Digital Charter Implementation Act of 2020. I am proud because our government set out to deliver an ambitious and comprehensive reform of Canada's framework for protecting the privacy of Canadians while amongst Canadian businesses. That, Madam Speaker, is exactly what we have done. Madam Speaker, there are strong imperatives for advancing this important package of reforms to our framework for privacy protection. Canadians deserve and expect strong protections, just as businesses deserve and expect clear rules of the road so that they can confidently deliver the products and services consumers want in an increasingly digital society. Prior to my time in government, Mr. Speaker, I spent 20 years in the business world, and I know how critical trust and confidence can be in business. Trust between manufacturers and their suppliers, between exporters and importers, and between businesses and consumers. In today's digital economy, protecting personal information is key to earning and maintaining that trust. Dans cet esprit,
in the spirit, Bill C-11 provides strong safeguards for the privacy of Canadians, and rightly so. Violations of the Act will be subject to stiff penalties. This new legislation will also provide a solid framework for businesses that would like to thrive in the digital economy. These businesses will be well positioned to earn and keep the trust of their customers, all without compromising their ability to innovate and respond to the demands of an increasing discerning customer base. This bill seeks to strike the right balance between these imperatives and the need to strengthen Canadians' confidence in the digital economy.
Mr. Speaker, there are important reasons to move forward with this legislation, and I hope all my colleagues in the House will be supportive. As we have noted in the previous debate, and as members are well aware, the Consumer Privacy Protection Act proposed in Bill C-11 will serve to bring Canada in line with other international jurisdictions. In particular, the CPPA will support interoperability of Canada's privacy regime with that of the European Union, a very important partner for Canada. I will speak in more about the importance of this in a moment. This bill will also support a strong and coherent national framework for privacy so that Canadians and businesses know what to expect from coast to coast to coast. Mr. Speaker, we're not alone in seeing the urgency to modernize and strengthen privacy laws in the current environment. The provinces do too. While Quebec continues to advance proposed new provincial legislation, Ontario and British Columbia are also considering new legislation or substantive amendments to their existing provincial laws. Moving forward with our legislation now allows us to continue to provide leadership in this area and ensure a harmonized approach to privacy protection across our nation. This is really crucial for both business and to encourage investment in Canada. It is also crucial to ensuring that all Canadians can have an equivalent level of privacy protection wherever they decide to conduct business. Mr. Speaker, the past year has clearly demonstrated how fundamental digital and data-driven technologies have become in our economy and in our society at large. Never before, as a society, have we been more reliant on secure, efficient, and accessible technologies as a means to conduct a range of everyday activities. As I noted previously, the foundation for such a robust digital and data-driven economy is trust. Canadians have been clear in saying that they want strong legal protections for their personal information, backed up by meaningful enforcement and oversight. They have indicated to us these principles are essential to their participation in the digital economy. Businesses also recognize this and are seeking clear and consistent rules in this area. Mr. Speaker, our previous legislation has served us well for almost 20 years. But the digital economy, as we all know, is constantly evolving, and we must evolve with it. A modern privacy framework will set the right foundations, not only for a post-pandemic recovery, but for many years to come. J'ai souligné.
Mr. Speaker, I have emphasized how privacy is a major concern for all levels of government, including the provinces and our international partners. The federal private sector privacy legislation is based on a central objective to establish national guidelines for organizations operating on the Internet, a global network that knows no borders. We would like to build a strong, interoperable national economy. In order to achieve this, privacy rules must be harmonized across the country. Mr. Speaker, businesses and consumers are looking to the federal government for leadership as we set national standards in this area. Over the past few years, a parliamentary committee has been reviewing privacy legislation in the private sector, and I would like to thank them for their work. In the course of this exercise, many business representatives and experts have emphasized the importance of maintaining protection that is deemed adequate in relation to the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. Indeed, we need to ensure the free flow of data from the European Union to Canada. The same is true for data from the United Kingdom, whose privacy regime is comparable to that of the European Union. The European Commission has made it clear that Canada needs to make changes to its privacy regime to maintain its current privileged status. And as a former Minister of International Trade and Minister of Foreign Affairs, I can tell you that this is vitally important for Canada. Mr. Speaker, I am confident that the proposed reforms to the private sector privacy law will help us achieve this goal, and this without abandoning our uniquely Canadian perspective.
My department's mandate for economic growth and development has required that we considered many factors when determining how to modernize and strengthen a privacy law that applies to the marketplace. One of Bill C-11's goals is for businesses to understand their obligations so they can build in strong privacy protections from the outset in their business. Our current law and the new law that is proposed applies across sectors, businesses, and activities. This means that the bill must meet a diverse range of needs and be equally easy to follow, no matter what line of work, particularly for small and medium-sized businesses. Mr. Speaker, to achieve this, we must first provide businesses with certainty and clarity regarding their obligations. That is why we are proposing to change the way the law is drafted. PIPEDA, the framework which has been routinely referred by the acronym, was based on a series of principles. The new law has translated these principles into clear legal requirements. We have also clarified the application of the Act in a number of key areas.
Second, we need to help businesses better understand how these obligations apply to their operations in practice. The Consumer Privacy Act gives businesses the ability to consult with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner without fear of repercussions. This will allow businesses to fully understand and comply with the requirements before problems arise. The bill includes a framework for the recognition of codes of practice and certification programs. These provisions will clarify how the Act is to be applied in particular sectors or areas.
Mr. Speaker, these measures are especially important for our small businesses. They need to be able to focus on what matters most: quality products, good customer service, and growing their business, while having confidence that they are following the rules. We also need to make sure that we don't add unnecessary administrative burden, particularly on those who may not have the time or resources to invest in complex legal analysis and advice. Our approach ensures that fundamental protections are established and enforced in a way that is fair and accessible to all business, no matter their size. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we must provide sufficient incentives for compliance to ensure a level playing field across the marketplace. In recent years, the Privacy Commissioner has called for a stronger enforcement regime under the private sector privacy law. Bill C-11 responds to this. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker, the Privacy Commissioner is at the heart of Canada's privacy regime. The Commissioner and the Office help businesses understand the law and intervene to protect Canadians when the law is broken. So it stands to reason that the new legislation enhances the role and powers of the Commissioner. The Commissioner already has an educational role, which will be maintained and strengthened under the new regime. The Commissioner will continue to play a key research and policy role. This will be complemented by a review function for organizational privacy practices. In addition, the Commissioner will review and approve codes of practice and certification programs. This will give organizations and individuals the confidence that personal information is being managed in strict compliance with the law. Clear guidelines help protect personal information and prevent breaches. This clarity is essential to a well-functioning privacy framework. Mr. Speaker, as you know, the bill provides for significant financial consequences for businesses that violate the law. The fines and administrative financial penalties are a clear demonstration of the government's commitment to protecting personal information. That said, such penalties should only be imposed after fair and transparent procedures. This is precisely why the bill provides for the creation of a tribunal to adjudicate on these matters. This means that companies will not have to appear before a federal court. The tribunal will allow all parties to pursue remedies in a less expensive and more accessible manner. Over time, the tribunal will develop a body of privacy jurisprudence.
Let me summarize the approach that the government has taken in modernizing our private sector privacy law. Bill C-11 acknowledges strengths of our existing law, what is referred as PIPEDA. In particular, its non-prescriptive, flexible, and balanced approach to privacy protection. It reinforces individuals' control over their personal information where it matters most, and it enables innovation. Moreover, it introduces serious financial consequences for the most egregious behavior. It ensures procedural fairness, and it recognizes the role of the federal government in regulating the economy while respecting the important role that provincial governments also play in private sector privacy regulation. This is the continuation of a Made in Canada approach that recognizes both the right to privacy and the needs of organizations to use personal information for appropriate purposes. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I am confident Canadians will agree that the law offers them the protection they are seeking, together with all the benefits that a growing digital economy can bring. I want to thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be happy to take questions from colleagues. Merci.
Questions and comments? The member for Red Deer Mountain View.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks so much to the minister for his statement on this particular bill. I want to indicate that Jim Basili had noted that with regard to this bill, that the privacy bill fails to curtail the surveillance economy or protect Canadians. The government's proposed legislation wouldn't curb the mass surveillance or behavior manipulation that the tech industry currently engages in with impunity. In fact, he specifically says that Bill C-11 demonstrates that the Liberal government, and I quote, is not fully aware of the power of the data economy and the impact it has on the lives of Canadians, ending his quote. This is considered a fundamental flaw in the bill. What can we do in order to address this particular issue?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I was waiting for you to give me the floor. I'd like to thank my colleague for the question, and he raised important issues. I mean, I know Jim Basili. He knows Jim Basili. He's a very important voice in our country when it comes to the digital economy. And I think, Mr. Speaker, I would invite the members to study these issues at committee. That's why we want to send the bill to committee, so that different voices can be heard in order to strike the right balance. Like I said, we need to ensure that we have a 21st century framework, I would say, to protect the information of Canadians, while at the same time helping to bring innovation in our country. My goal and our goal should be, as parliamentarians, to have the best framework that you can have, I would say, in the G7 and beyond, so that on one hand, we can ensure Canadians that we as Parliament have taken their concern very seriously, but at the same time that we will put a framework that will provide for innovation. And I would hope that, as the members suggested, that we can hear many voices during the important work of the committee and work with all of you to make sure that we have the best possible legislation.
The member, questions and comments, the member for Vancouver East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Privacy Commissioner indicated that there is concerns about the new Bill C-11's new commercial activity definition and consent rules. And the concern is that it would open up the door to new commercial uses of personal information without consent. There seems to be an approach that people are suggesting, and that is to restore the previous language that was in place. Would the minister support such an amendment?
The Honourable Minister.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Speaker, I was waiting for you to give you the floor. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the colleague for the question. She raised an important issue. I mean, the issue of consent needs to be, the provision in the bill needs to be strong. It needs to be an informed consent. That's what Canadians expect from us. That's what we certainly want to ensure in the bill. And if the member and other member of this House, through the work of the committee, want to propose or review certain portion of that, they can rest assured that we will listen, obviously, to the Privacy Commissioner. He has a very important role in our system. And certainly, we want to make sure that the consent is informed. And as a lawyer myself, I can assure you, we want to look at that very carefully to make sure that when Canadians provide their consent is a true and informed consent, so that it's in plain language and that people can understand what they're consenting to. Merci, Madame Speaker.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank the Minister for his speech. Well, at the Bloc Québécois, we think it's a good idea to strengthen the protection of personal data, but we're a little concerned about the number of cases of fraud that we've seen, even with CERD benefits. So my question for the Minister is, would he not think that this bill should also apply to the federal government? And if not, what is the federal government going to do to improve identity checks when people are applying for benefits, for example? because a lot of people were defrauded of their CERB benefits. The Honourable Minister. I want to thank my honourable member, my neighbour, in fact. He has the neighbouring riding from me. And I want to thank the Bloc Québécois for working with us to move C11 forward. As he says, I think that most Canadians want to have a system that will protect their data and will give them a framework that is more modern and adapted to today's needs. Now, certainly, Madam Speaker, we always want to have the most sophisticated measures possible in place to protect Canadians' personal information. I'm sorry, we need to move on to other questions.
Secretary to the Minister of National Revenue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Minister, C11 references innovation. It references the strengthening of privacy for Canadians. And as he references in his comments, his 20 years in business, how important that is that in the modern day world we are in?
Madam Chair, I guess you're allowing me to respond?
Wait.
Yes, okay. I see you nodding. Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me. I would say, colleagues, and I want to thank the member for the question, privacy is essential. Trust in the digital economy is essential. And that's why we together as parliamentarians need to find the right balance for Canadians to be safe and at the same time having innovation. That's why I'm so pleased that colleagues have worked together to bring C11 to committee so that we can offer as a legacy to future generation a framework that they will be proud, that will protect their information, that will spur innovation, and that will protect their data as they expect from this parliament to do in an age where the digital economy and the data economy is becoming more and more present in our lives.
Questions and comments? Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's my first opportunity to address the minister since he's changed portfolio, and I can't start without thanking him once again for enormous personal effort at rescuing various constituents who were on cruise ships some months ago. But my question is, of course, to C11. I've read the commentary, as I'm sure he has, of Daniel Terrien, our Commissioner for Privacy, who is disappointed in C11 for failure to ensure that privacy is recognized as a right, and a rights-based approach would deal with a lot of the criticisms that are going to come up. I know that the government's taking the view that this is a constitutional matter and there are limitations, but the Supreme Court has made important comments on privacy. Is the minister open to changing this? I don't know if my final question came through someone else's voice. Cut in, Madam Speaker. May I repeat the last bit of my
Okay, if you could ask the question very quickly because we are running out of time and...
Yes. The question is, can be put to the point, will the minister be open to amendments to ensure that privacy is recognized as a right?
L'honorable ministre?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, first of all, let me say to the member from Saanich Gulf Island how much I appreciate working with her. She is a true parliamentarian, and having been able to repatriate people together, I should say, was a true honor to serve. To her point, I think that the new legislation recognized the individual right to privacy. We have listened to the Privacy Commissioner, but I think the framework we're presenting is striking the right balance, Madam Speaker. But I'm always willing to listen to the member from Saanich Gulf Island because she's a member who always provide extremely good feedback to this government in order to serve Canadians in the best possible way.
Time for a brief question. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And thank you, Minister, for appearing today and in your new portfolio. What kind of assurances has the government received that the legislation as drafted will be GDPR compliant? Because business needs that certainty.
Réponse du ministre.
Oui, Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, I'd like to say, first of all, thank you to my colleague for bringing that. This is fundamental. I would say the analysis we've made and the comments we've received when we drafted the bill have provided the right feedback in order that to be compliant. And I understand stability and predictability We have a number of flagship Canadian companies who depend on data to be exchanged with the European Union, one of our largest trading partner, and we are confident that this is meeting the standard. But I'd be happy to listen to the member at committee if he wants to add to that, Madam Chair.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure for me to be able to join the debate this afternoon on Bill C-11. Bill C-11 raises important issues about the privacy of Canadians. It's legislation that seeks to reform aspects of our privacy framework in Canada, the use of Canadians' data. And I look forward to the debate that's going to happen, the study that's going to take place at committee, because I know this bill raises many important issues, and it's a very technical area. It's one that Canadians will want to delve into the details and find out what the impacts of the provisions are, and whether the bill does the things the government says it does or not. I have some initial comments that I think will show how I'm thinking about these issues of privacy and some of the main threats facing the privacy of Canadians. Just a couple comments initially on the provisions of the bill. It provides our Privacy Commissioner with important new order-making powers. It brings in fines. It gives individuals the right to demand that their data is destroyed. It brings in some new powers and provisions for privacy protection, as well as for the Privacy Commissioner. So these are some important things to look at, and I think require some study of the details. And I can say certainly from this side of the House, our Conservative caucus is very much committed to protecting Canadians' privacy and to ensure that the details all check out with what the government has claimed. So again, Madam Speaker, looking forward to the depth of conversation that I know is going to happen and needs to happen on a piece of legislation, an important policy area such as this. I want to flag some of the concerns that I have that I think we need to think about in terms of the process of this legislation, as well as the broader framework of privacy in this country. So this bill was initially tabled in the fall, and it has had very limited debate between then and now, and it underlines this sort of confusion we have about the government's legislative priorities. It looks very much like they're trying to set themselves up to complain about their legislation not passing by scheduling a bill for an hour here and an hour there, rather than having the kind of focus we would typically expect from a government that is trying to pass legislation. Generally, if a government identifies a bill as an area of priority, they will schedule that bill for enough time to be able to complete debate, and then it proceeds to committee. But today alone, we've had an hour of debate on a pandemic election bill and then now in the afternoon, we're going on to a completely different topic, rather than the government picking one issue to try to actually move the debate forward. The other thing on a process point that is interesting to me about this bill is the committee they're planning on referring this to. So we have an industry, science, and technology committee that has an important role in terms of the looking at the regulation of business and promoting business development in this country and so forth. And the minister who just spoke, who's leading this discussion, is the Minister of Industry. But are we seeing this bill referred to the Industry Committee? Actually, we're not. Once this passes second reading, the bill will be referred to the Ethics Committee. And the Ethics Committee does have a mandate that includes privacy, but I note in particular that there's a lot going on right now at the Ethics Committee. The Ethics Committee is doing important work trying to get to the bottom of the We Charity scandal. And if I was a cynic about the government's motivations, I would say, isn't it interesting that they have decided to bring forward legislation and then refer it to the Ethics Committee, given the traditions we've had in this place of legislation receiving a priority at committee, and yet we've got these critical issues of government ethics and scandal that we need to get to the bottom of, and it looks like a maneuver to try to push that We scandal off the agenda. And it's very striking to see the way the government has been so desperate to try to avoid discussion of their own ethical lapses, in particular around the We Charity scandal, that they've done all kinds of things to actually damage their own legislative agenda simply in order to try to cover themselves on the ethical front. In fact, the government prorogued Parliament, right? Going back to last summer, there was important information that was coming out as part of committee studies that were going on in relation to the We Charity scandal, and the government prorogued Parliament. And then this issue comes back in the fall, and then we're trying to restart study of it. The government threatens to declare something a confidence issue in order to avoid having a separate committee that could study it. If we had a separate committee, this wouldn't be an issue, right? If we had a separate committee that was looking at these various issues of government corruption, then we wouldn't have an issue, seeing this legislation studied at the private Ethics and Privacy Committee. But now, with this renewed discussion and new information coming out, right now as well, we see the government bringing back C11. You wonder if the House leader thought, okay, we want to kill this discussion of the We Charity situation at ethics. We can't prorogue Parliament again, right? I mean, I suppose they could, but it sort of gets more and more obvious what they're doing, right? So let's bring back this bill that we haven't done anything on in months and try to get it sent to the Ethics Committee. This is just more of the kind of games I think we see from this government. And if they were serious about us being able to get to the bottom of these ethics issues as well as moving forward with this legislation, simple matter of either allowing the creation of that special committee to look at the We Charity issues, or having this bill go to the Industry Committee. And again, it just begs the question: what is the government trying to hide here? The government's ethics failings are well known, and it seems the next step in their plan to avoid discussion of their terrible ethical record will be to call an election. A particularly extreme step to kill all of their legislation in order to shut down important discussion that's happening in Parliament around a wide variety of issues, including government ethics. If we have an early election, of course, we are not going to get anywhere on this bill. So hopefully the government will resist the urge to put politics and their own political interests first, and instead focus on the kind of policy work that we're doing, that we're prepared to do in this place to move important issues forward. Now, Madam Speaker, I want to also in this speech zero in on an important issue of privacy, and that is the threats to Canadians that come from foreign actors who are trying to access our data, who are in many cases trying to interfere in Canadian institutions, who are trying to intimidate Canadians, who are potentially stealing intellectual property. We need to take very seriously the threat to the privacy and the interests of Canadians that come from foreign actors. It is my view that the defining national security threat of our time is interference and intimidation in Canada by foreign state-backed entities. I have had the opportunity to work with many Canadians who have themselves been direct victims of this kind of intervention that threatens their security, that threatens their privacy, and so forth. We had a press conference here on Parliament Hill when I launched Motion 55, which is a private member's motion that I'm putting forward with respect to foreign state-backed interference and intimidation. We had 4 people participating in that press conference from different backgrounds, from different parts of the world originally, who are now Canadian, who shared their own stories of foreign state-backed intimidation. And all of them expressed frustration at the nature of the response. They felt they were being referred back and forth between different institutions, that we didn't really have the effective capacity to support them and to identify, okay, who's really responsible for addressing these issues? Is it CSIS? Is it Global Affairs? Is it RCMP? Is it local police? Who do they go to? Who responds to it? And what is the response then from government? And the response from the government has been quite weak. This minister who's now responsible for this legislation, we had many of these discussions in his previous role as a foreign affairs minister. And I would ask him the question, what are you doing in response to the likely, in some cases, very evident involvement of foreign diplomats in the interference with and intimidation of Canadians? And he would do this kind of look at the camera, let me tell these diplomats, don't interfere in Canadian affairs, right? Well, it's great to say that, but we need to have a policy framework in place, a strategy in place to protect the privacy of Canadians when it is threatened by malicious foreign actors, often state-backed or directed actors. It's with this in mind that Conservatives put forward an Opposition Day motion, which passed, calling on the government to put in place a comprehensive plan to protect Canadians from this kind of interference and intimidation. And the government just failed to respond effectively to that. My motion, Prime Member's motion M55, would reiterate the call that was in that Opposition Day motion, but also particularly focus on the issue of support to Canadians who are victims. Saying that we need to do more to support Canadians who are victims of foreign state-backed interference, and also that the federal government's approach to privacy in this area needs to involve cross-jurisdictional cooperation, that the federal government should seek to work collaboratively with provincial, territorial, and municipal governments on responding to foreign interference, recognizing that we do see manifestations of this foreign interference happening at other levels of government, efforts to capture elites, control institutions, misdirect funds to their interest, and so forth. We see those attempts at intimidation happening at other levels of government, and the response needs to involve effective engagement of those other levels of government as well. So this is, I think, another area where the government could be doing more and needs to do more to respond to this primary threat, this primary issue of our vulnerability in terms of national security. So in the midst of all this, saying the government needs a plan, they need a strategy on this, the simple thing they could do, though, is just take on board this principle of first do no harm. If they are, really recognize the threats in terms of security in this area, the first thing they could do is just say no to Huawei. Because we know there are threats to Canadian security, Canadian privacy, that would be associated with Huawei being involved in our 5G network. There's really no disputing the close relationship between Huawei and the Chinese state. We know that all facially private organizations are vulnerable, that are based in China, have a high degree of vulnerability to influence and control by the Chinese Communist Party. The requirement for party committees and deferring to party committees, the requirement that information be shared with the Chinese military and so forth, that would be requested by the Chinese military. So we know that the vulnerabilities that really exist across the board. But that's especially the case when we look at a company like Huawei. Clearly, there is a longstanding and very close relationship between the state and this company. Nobody else in the world has trouble figuring this out, right? 4 out of 5 Five Eyes countries have understood the importance of saying no here. And our own interests are at stake. Also, the opportunities for ongoing effective cooperation with our partners who see these risks. We don't want to be perceived in Canada as being a point of vulnerability. So that's, if we want to be able to maintain the levels of cooperation that are so important for our interests, then we have to work effectively with our allies and give them reason to have confidence in us. So yes, the government needs to have a comprehensive plan to address foreign interference and protect Canadians' privacy, but why not just start by saying no to Huawei, do no harm, right? And the government has just been absent in terms of answering these very basic questions when it comes to the involvement of Huawei in our 5G network. So going back, we had a previous public safety minister, Ralph Goodale, who said that we will make a decision before the election And we're not talking about the election the government's planning now. We're talking about the last election, right? 2019. The government said there would be a decision on Huawei before that election, right? We probably won't see a decision on Huawei at this rate before the next election. Maybe the one after it, if they stay in government. If Conservatives form government, I can tell you there'll be a decision very quickly when it comes to Huawei. But this government has put it off. And then they've continually said the decision is coming, the decision is coming. We had a part of our Opposition Day motion dealing with these intimidation, privacy issues of Canadians around foreign state-backed actors. We had our Opposition Day motion in which we included the requirement that the government make and announce a decision with respect to Huawei. But the deadline came and went. And this government, by the way, has a track record of ignoring the motions that are passed by a majority of Parliament. I think about their effort to create this narrative about Parliament isn't working. The reality is Parliament is generally working, but sometimes it does things they don't like. Sometimes you have the opposition working together to pass motions the government doesn't want to see passed. Sometimes you have cases of the opposition pushing an issue on the agenda, pushing it so much that the government, that many government members, as we saw with the Uyghur genocide, many government members supported what we were putting forward, even though the government abstained. So that, to me, that's a sign of a parliament that is lively, that it's working, that's doing its job, because it's holding powerful people to account. That's a big part of what parliament is supposed to do. And the government wants to spin this narrative of parliament working precisely because it is working. It just does things sometimes that they don't like, and some of that is born of the leadership of our party. Some of it is born of very good cooperation that has been on display between the various opposition parties. But the point is, we had a motion passed calling on the government to make a decision on Huawei, and they still have not. This is a huge issue for Canadian security, for Canadian privacy, for the protection of our national interest, really at this critical time in global affairs, where we're seeing heightened competition, and Canada needs to be clear and principled in terms of standing up and standing with other countries who believe in freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. And part of that protection of the rule of law, of human rights, is emphasizing the importance of protecting the privacy of Canadians, excluding actors from our systems that we know will not respect that privacy. In fact, actors that say they have a legal obligation to provide data to a foreign military when asked. And on the issue of Huawei as well, I think there's this issue of looking at the kinds of human rights violations that they and other Chinese state-affiliated companies are involved in. We see how with the Uyghur genocide, this technological enabling of human rights violations. Various companies, Dua and Hikvision, companies that the Canadian Pension Fund at one time invested in, and the involvement of Huawei and other companies that are just complicit in the kind of detailed monitoring and tracking and controlling. We see these horrific violations of privacy taking place inside of China right now. Horrific violations of privacy that are being enabled by the very companies that the government has not yet refused access to Canada. So that should be a huge concern in any privacy debate we're having, when the same companies that are part of things like the social credit system, whereby individuals are tracked in terms of whether the government thinks they're behaving well or not, and their ability to travel, to participate in certain kinds of events is dependent, and it's determined automatically by algorithms based on this intense monitoring and evaluation. It's this very Orwellian system that's being brought in. And then you have some of the actors that are involved in developing these kinds of technology and in deploying them. You have those same actors that are looking to do business here in Canada. So that should concern us, Madam Speaker. I think the government needs to make some clear choices. They need to decide where they stand on these issues, and they need to start standing with us in the opposition, who are taking a principled stand in defense of human rights, in defense of privacy, in defense of our national security, and recognizing and responding to these very real threats that we see from various other actors. Now, Madam Speaker, one of the other issues that I hope to see taken up at committee is the issue of people's privacy in terms of their intimate images and just some of the horrific abuses of people's human rights that we've seen perpetrated through the Pornhub platform. We've heard testimony at committee where people's intimate images, even involving minors, posted without their consent repeatedly, and that's another privacy issue that this Parliament must act on urgently without delay. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honourable member for Mississauga, Erin Mills.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And, in 2019, during the summer, I was very, very surprised to receive a text message from what was a volunteer from the Conservative Party of Canada on my government cell phone asking me if I wanted to vote Conservative and to reply back to them via text. I found it very strange, and I see that some members from the New Democratic Party and the Green Party would like for C11 to apply to political parties. What does the member have to say about that?
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And it's interesting that we would have been texting the member asking if she wants to support the Conservative Party. I can only say hope springs eternal, right? We can hope that all Canadians will eventually see the value of what we're putting forward, and I'm hopeful even the member for Kingston and the Islands will see the light at some point and recognize the opportunity he has to support the Conservative Party going forward. Madam Speaker, I think it's an interesting issue in terms of political parties. Maybe it can be as well further studied at the committee level.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable député de Shefford.
The honourable member for Shefford. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech about this important piece of legislation on privacy. Now, as my colleague for Berthier-Masquis-Langer previously mentioned, there's the issue of CERB fraud. Last fall, we heard about CRA fraud, with some people having trouble accessing their CRA accounts, and we're having a difficulty accessing EI, even though at that time some people in red zones were losing their jobs. Now, when it comes to privacy, that may be an area of Quebec or Canadian jurisdiction depending on the sector, and some businesses may find that they are under different levels of jurisdiction depending on the case. There are some areas that are quite vague and difficult to pin down. So how does my colleague think this could be clarified? The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an important question, a technical one, but certainly an important question. It does speak to the need for effective collaboration across jurisdictions. We have seen in the life of this government a number of cases where the government data, the data that the government has on Canadians, there have been data breaches with respect to the use of that data. So we need to be attentive to those kinds of problems, as well as to the issues she raised, identifying the need for greater cross-jurisdictional support and collaboration. And I think, again, this is an important issue that we need to delve into further.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for North Island, Powell River.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank the member so much for his interesting speech. One of the things that I want to talk about today is the importance of privacy. And I know that Conservatives were rightly worried about the federal COVID notification app and what that could mean for privacy. And along with the New Democrats, asked some really tough questions of the government that got us an app that respects privacy while remaining effective. I'm just wondering if the member could address how there is no need to trade off privacy rights while addressing other priorities.
Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an excellent point from my colleague. And this is what we've done is push the government to actually take these issues seriously and to recognize that you can put in place the appropriate mechanisms to protect privacy and achieve other objectives. I know in the context of the pandemic we're in, the reality is that tracing is a very important tool in terms of responding to the virus. We know countries that have put in place effective tracing systems have generally been much more effective in their response overall. It is an opportunity, a strategy that is very important. At the same time, there are a lot of concerns that I have heard from people every time I talk about, and I'm firm in that view, the value of tracing. There are people that push back and say, no, I don't trust this system. And that's why we need to communicate to people that there can be confidence in the system and actually put in place the mechanisms to ensure they can have confidence in the system so that we can provide the support required in the COVID-19 response.
That's the honourable member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker, and certainly thank the member for his intervention today. He does tremendous work on human rights, whether it be for Canadians here or for people across the world. I'm going to quote from the Privacy Commissioner in the response to C11's tabling. Bill C11 opens the door to new commercial uses of personal information without consent, but does not specify that such uses are conditional on privacy rights being respected. Rather, the bill essentially repeats the purpose clause of the current legislation, which gives equal weight to privacy and the commercial interests of organizations. In fact, the new purpose clause places even greater emphasis on the importance of the use of personal information for economic activity. The previous speaker from Powell River, Madam Speaker, had talked about the public uses of information and getting the balance right. What does the member think about the need to have a balanced framework for human rights within Canada, particularly around economic ones?
Yes, the honourable member for Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague for his excellent intervention, and it was a pleasure to work with him previously on the Canada-China Committee, where we were dealing with some of these issues that I talked about in my speech around foreign actors. To his specific question, I think it should concern all Canadians that the government is including in this legislation mechanisms that that expand the use without the possible use of data without those privacy protections that we would expect. And this is sort of the nature of this. They're piling these things into this bill, not always fronting some of those more concerning aspects of those changes in their communications. And that just speaks to the importance of the parliamentary scrutiny that is required to get to the bottom of the details and to understand their impacts.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Well, the member suggested that he hopes I see the light of the Conservatives, but I can assure him that when 54% of the Conservative Party is against climate change, it's pretty much a non-starter, although I do admire his interest. This member, keeps saying that the governing party wants an election, but we're not even talking about it on this side of the House. I'm pretty sure that member has brought up the word election in this House more than everybody who's been speaking for the Liberal Party over the last couple of weeks. As a matter of fact, if they're not interested in an election, Madam Speaker, there were 8 confidence votes last night alone, and this member voted against.
Of order, the honourable member for North Island Powell River.
I was so enjoying that question, but we have completely lost sound.
Is it working now?
All of us in virtual land did not hear the question from the member for Kingston and the Islands.
Okay. So can you hear me now? Are you getting the sound now? Yes.
We're delighted to hear you.
If the honourable member can summarize that question.
In summary, I believe in climate change and the Conservatives don't, so I could never become a Conservative, and I apologize. But he keeps talking about an election. We had 8 confidence votes last night alone. I asked for a recorded vote on every single one. He voted, this member and all the Conservatives voted against the budget bill, in essence, voting down confidence. So he's actually the one that appears to be interested in an election. And he talked about a special committee on we. Well, you got a majority if you go to your friends in the bloc and you, Madam Speaker, there's a majority to set up that committee. Why didn't this member go to his friends in the bloc and the NDP and set up that committee?
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. If the member were to want to join the Conservative Party, his views on climate change would not be the barrier. It would be his casual disregard for the truth that would get him in more trouble if he were to want to join us on this side of the House. I do welcome him joining this side of the House, but more in a sort of switch places type of scenario. Now, he spoke about how Conservatives voted last night on the government's spending. Conservatives do not agree with key aspects of the direction of the government. So it is our responsibility in representing our constituents to raise our concerns, to speak about them, and to vote accordingly. I will note, though, that those confidence votes passed, that a majority of this House supported those measures. And so it would be particularly rich for the government. After getting the confidence of the House, they didn't need my support to do it, getting the confidence of the House to then pull the plug later. And look, we think it's important to warn Canadians about the government's plans with respect to an election. And the more the member tries to deny it, I mean, it'll be particularly interesting to play back some of those conversations if the Prime Minister does actually do what many people expect him to do in the next few months.
Time for a very brief question. The honourable member for Victoria.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank the member for his speech and in particular for his points on how the Liberals have been scheduling an hour of debate here and an hour of debate on another bill without giving them enough time to move forward. I'm thinking in particular of Bill C-12, the Net Zero Climate Accountability Act. It's been months and the government has yet to really schedule enough time to finish second reading, and they either need to admit that climate accountability isn't a priority for them or schedule time. I hope they don't use their own game playing to delay important legislation and as an excuse for an election. But on the privacy bill, does the member agree that—
Lee, I did ask for a brief question. There's only 20 seconds left. I'll ask the honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan to respond.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just respond to the question, and it's an important point that for those who are following the way legislation is normally scheduled, the government's approach is very, very different. Some of these bills we agree with, some of them we don't, but the normal thing for government to do would be to prioritize legislation they want to see passed and schedule enough debate for it to move forward. They're not doing that, very clearly setting the stage for something else. They have no interest in passing their own legislation, very evidently.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Mississauga, Erin Mills.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to participate in the second reading of Bill C-11, the Digital Charter Implementation Act 2020, and I'll be splitting my time today with the member for Davenport. When Canada's privacy sector of privacy law was introduced in 2000, Parliament intended that it would achieve two objectives: privacy protection for individuals and the growth of electronic commerce. Over 20 years later, our government is introducing this legislation to provide an updated strategy for protecting privacy in our new digital world. I've heard loud and clear from the constituents in my riding of Mississauga Erin Mills that they want to see strong privacy laws. These privacy laws not only protect consumers and help build trust in the digital marketplace, but they also, with the Consumer Privacy Protection Act, a principled, agile, privacy enforcement regime will create a vital safeguard as companies engage in the digital economy. Today, I'd like to provide further insight into a key aspect of this bill that will not only provide guidance for businesses for protecting individuals' personal information, but will also support responsible innovation. I'm speaking today about provisions in the new Consumer Privacy Protection Act to formally recognize codes of practice and certification systems as a means of demonstrating compliance with the law. Madam Speaker, a key strength of our current private sector privacy law, commonly known as PIPEDA, will be maintained in the new Consumer Privacy and Protection Act. That strength is a principled approach to rule setting. Our private sector privacy law applies to all organizations in all industry sectors of all sizes and levels of sophistication. This level of general application is crucial in order to establish a baseline of privacy protection that applies across the marketplace. While comprehensive, this law must also be flexible, non-prescriptive, and technology neutral so that it can be applied in all circumstances. These characteristics have long been recognized as a key strength of the existing law, and there is widespread support for maintaining this approach. However, it is sometimes a challenge for organizations, especially smaller businesses, without dedicated legal resources to understand how to implement these high-level obligations within their specific context. For example, Consider a situation where an organization is using a cutting-edge technology which has not yet been the subject of a finding by the Privacy Commissioner, or where an organization must handle complicated data flows with complex accountability, such as in connected and automated vehicles. These challenges are becoming more commonplace in a data-driven economy. To help address these problems and to provide assurance to businesses and consumers alike, the Consumer Privacy Protection Act would allow any entity to apply to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner for approval of a code of practice that provides a specific set of rules for how organizations can operate in compliance with the law. This approval would be particularly useful for organizations using a new technology or operating with a new business model. Madam Speaker, this type of regulatory certainty is very much needed in today's rapidly developing economy. It gives organizations and their business partners a level of comfort that they are operating on the side of the law. It also supports a level playing field in areas where there is no jurisprudence or specific guidance for organizations. And it also makes it more transparent to Canadians how their personal information is being used in these circumstances. To take it one...
It's well, unfortunately, fortunately, depends which way you look at it. It's 1:30. The honourable member will have 5 minutes and 5.5 minutes the next time this matter is before the House.
It is 1:30. The House will now move on to private members' business.
Private members' business. Consideration at report stage of Bill C-228, Reduction of Recidivism Framework Act, standing in the name of Mr. Bragdon.
There being no motions at report stage, the House will now proceed without debate to the putting of the question on the motion to concur in the bill at report stage.
Seconded by Mr. Moore, moves that Bill C-228, an act to establish a federal framework to reduce recidivism, as amended, be concurred in at report stage. If a member of a recognized party present in the House wishes to request a recorded division or that the motion be adopted on division, I would invite them to rise and indicate it to the chair. The
honourable member for Shefford. I ask for a recorded division. Pursuant to the order made on Monday, January 25th, 2021, the division stands deferred until Wednesday, the 14th of April, 2021, at the expiry of the time provided for oral questions. As it is 1:31.
Adjourn until next Monday at 11 a.m. pursuant to Standing Order 24-1.